So good morning, everybody. This is just such a fantastic crowd to see on a Saturday morning. And my name is Amy Lyle. I'm a social worker here at the Wasteman Center, and I work in the Down Syndrome Clinic and Autism and Developmental Disabilities Clinic, as well as the Resource Center and the Regional Center. And I also, previous to this role, was a case manager for Dane County in the Children's Long-Term Support Waiver and Family Support System. And when we were approached about doing a presentation on safety, the first person to come to my mind was Julie Hajewski, and I knew I wanted to do this talk with her because she is someone who is a true expert on safety, and I'm just really thrilled that she agreed.
Good morning. As Amy said, I'm Julie Hajewski. I'm an adult nurse practitioner with UW Health. I work in our internal medicine outpatient clinic up in Beaver Dam. But that is not where my expert with safety for individuals with Down syndrome lies. That is where my expertise comes in. That's my Mikey. He is 5 years old. He is a kindergartner this year. Mikey is still primarily nonverbal, and he is inquisitive and loves to explore the world. And it's that combination of his nonverbal and inquisitive that makes safety a challenge at our house. And so over the last 5 years, we have learned and developed and come up with some pretty creative ways to keep our house and Mikey safe. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk to you about today.
So as we all know, there are many aspects to safety, and from crossing the street to internet safety. How do I know someone is a friend? But for the purposes of today's talk, we are specifically going to be talking about wandering and risk of elopement or bolting or running away. Not running off to get married, but just running away. And as part of that, we are going to be talking about behavioral strategies, just briefly. So what are those tools that we can use and teach to support a child in learning to not wander or run away? Who else needs to know about this issue? And by this, we mean who else should we be talking to about the safety concern that we have and that you might have for your child or children that you're who are in your care. We also want to talk about identification for kids, and it's something that is seemingly obvious but goes really beyond your typical medical alert bracelet. So we would just want to talk about some other ideas for that. And we also want to talk about safety at home, so practical tools you can use to try to prevent your child from leaving the home without your knowledge, to alert you when your child is leaving or has left an area, and devices that may help you locate your child if they happen to wander off or run away. And we want to let you know that we do have a handout that's available outside of this door, right to your right as you're exiting. So we list all of the items that we're talking about today and some websites and resources so you don't feel like you have to be scrambling and writing everything down. And then lastly, we're also going to talk about safety away from home or when traveling. And so this could mean grandma's house that's 2 miles away or a Down Syndrome Association conference in the Dells. How do you keep your kiddo safe? So in terms of behavioral strategies, we also just want to mention that whenever there is a behavioral challenge, whether it's wandering or something else entirely, we always want to first rule out any medical causes of the challenging behavior, and also become curious about what is the function of this behavior. Could this be caused by a deficit in communication? Could expectations be too high for a given situation? So some of the examples of behavioral strategies, these are probably going to be familiar to you, but are important just to kind of remember and also refresh about reintroducing those that may have worked in the past but we forgot about, or have we been trying behavioral strategies long enough or been consistent enough with them. And so one idea is to use printable visuals to teach concepts like stop by placing literally a printout of a stop sign on exterior doors, and to refer to them when you're teaching the skill of stopping before leaving. And when we're teaching these skills of stopping or alerting an adult before leaving, we want to praise enthusiastically when a kiddo stops to wait for an adult or caregiver before leaving the house. Just tons of praise. Another strategy is that we can use social stories with photos of your home and your child in order to teach the expected behavior, like stopping and waiting for an adult before leaving the home. And we can also involve siblings in this as well, them modeling the appropriate stopping and letting somebody know behavior, and also just catching your child when they don't leave immediately and really praising that behavior too. So who else needs to know about these safety issues? One suggestion that we make to families is to alert law enforcement if that is something that you feel comfortable doing. Contacting local law enforcement proactively to provide a photo of your child as well as a description of your child, your contact information in case police are called to help locate your child, or if police find your child and your child isn't able to communicate their identity. We also encourage folks to talk to neighbors and communicate the same information. So if you feel comfortable doing this, let them know that if they ever see your child without an older sibling or an adult with them, to please not let them out of their sight and either bring them to your home or stay with them or whatever plan you would develop for neighbors. But just especially if your kiddo should never be outside by themselves, it's great to have neighbors keeping an eye out. And we also want to make sure that we talk to school about these things too. Sometimes safety issues don't present in the same way at school, but we want school to be aware that there are safety issues and make sure that those concerns are included in your child's IEP. An example would be supervision for safety across environments or extra precautions during field trips. There may also be some help that school can provide in helping your child get from a bus or a car into the school environment safely as well. So schools are fantastic partners as well in these safety concerns. So in terms of identification for your child, there are many other types of ID bracelets available these days. There is the more traditional, metal medical alert bracelet, but there are also Velcro ones and also just softer plastic ones that are more tolerable. They are fairly inexpensive to get on the internet, and so if your child is someone who can tolerate something like that on a wrist or an ankle, we really encourage you to look into that as a possibility. And then another possibility are shoe tags. And so, of course, the child would have to have their shoes on to be helpful, which isn't always the case. But a lot of times if that's part of your child's routine or they just have their shoes on all the time anyway, this can be sort of a fail-safe, we don't have to remember to put this on kind of item that's always on your kiddo if you're out and about. And those, again, can be sort of laced in or something that's strapped on with Velcro. Just another option to think about in terms of if your child was away from you, how they might be able to be identified. So now I'm going to turn it over to Julie for all her wonderful tips.
So first we're going to talk a little bit about safety at home. And today I've just tried to include a few examples of some of the things that we use and have thought of. There's lots of others. Safety at home for us can take on many different forms. Sometimes it's containment, simple as we need to make sure you're in the house and you're staying in the house and that you're here with us and you haven't left when we didn't know it. Sometimes it's the avoidance of injury and safety while you're in the house, making sure that you're not getting into something that's going to hurt you. My husband and I always joke, and I'm sure many people who are caregivers of individuals with Down syndrome can agree, I'm always amazed at the type of things that my son can find to injure himself with within our very home. So home and appliance safety is probably one of the most challenging areas that I've ran into because every refrigerator, every oven, every microwave has a different handle mount, a different place. I'm a big fan of go on Amazon and buy 6 different ones and ship them to the house. And I have all of these, and I have found a use for them far beyond everything they show in the pictures. Everything from keeping a cupboard closed, those toilet locks I hate, that one on the left will keep a toilet closed, I promise. And cabinet locks, we all know about these things with babies, but I really encourage people to think about creative uses for them, so that we can keep our kiddos out of places that they shouldn't be in our house or that can cause troubles. Door and doorway safety. If any of you saw me come in this morning, you thought, why is that lady carrying a baby gate? Because this thing goes everywhere with me. Not literally, but this is probably my favorite baby gate, and it's cheap, it's at Target, it's adjustable. You know, can my kid climb over it and knock it out of the doorway? Absolutely, but I promise you that clatter of that gate and that cry of surprise when the gate goes down pretty much always either brings me out of bed or alerts me. This is the gate that we use in my son's door to his bedroom every night so that he is not wandering in our house while we're sleeping. So they can be a really inexpensive tool, and can really at least slow our kiddos down to give us a chance to help them make good choices. This is our back door. I literally just took a picture of our back door at home. We've got a couple of strategies at play here. See if I can get my pointer to work. At home, instead of a stop sign, we've got a picture of a little guy walking out the door with a red X across it. That is mounted on a piece of Velcro on the door frame. If you look closely here, it's a little hard to see, but this over here is a little stoplight with only the green light lit up. So my son knows that when the red man is on the door, we're not going outside. And if he wants to go outside, he'll go get the green stoplight and bring it to me. For example, if Dad leaves and next thing I know, here comes Mikey with the green light. I say, yeah, Dad went bye-bye, but we can't right now. So that's one strategy behaviorally for my son to recognize that. The second strategy that we have is this little white box right here. That little white box is a magnetic door alarm. It literally is mounted with a couple of 3M plastic strips. It has a magnet, and when that door is open and the magnets are separated, it has two different alarms. One is a nice chime, sounds a little bit like a doorbell, and the other one is the death scream. I have one here, so if anybody wants to look at it later, because people are like, oh, I don't know if that's loud enough or if that'll work, I can show it to you. I can tell you that once I start to employ that particular alarm, Mikey stops opening and closing the door because the noise is pretty irritating. And like I say, the charm is nice because we can say, oh, somebody just came in, let's go check that out. And the third thing that we employ right here on the top, that's actually a good old-fashioned chain lock, little chain that comes over and hooks. That gets hooked every night at our house before we go to bed. Because yes, Mikey has left the house in the night and gotten locked out of the house. And so when we're all home in our house ready to go to bed, that chain lock goes on. Now, of course, the reason we have the middle one is because when somebody's gone, you can't leave the chain lock on because they can't get back in. So that's when I use the alarm instead, for example, if my husband is out, so he can get back in the house. So that is our back door. Door hardware, as my husband says, this comes with a higher level of commitment. We're out of the plastic 3M strips and into screws and hardware. One of the key things that I would mention about door hardware, much as you saw on that picture of my back door, if I took a picture of all the other doors in my house, you would see that things like hook and eyes are all mounted just above my shoulder height. Is Mikey old enough now that he knows that he can drag a chair over and start working on that lock? Sure. But again, it usually buys me enough time to say, hey buddy, what are you up to? For some of our older kiddos who are, reaching adult height, becomes more challenging. But that's just a simple kind of idea that I give to parents. We also have those slide locks, we have chain locks. I don't have the first one, but I've had a lot of parents tell me that's a really great option. You see those on hotel doors. Again, I can get the door open a few inches to say, hey, go get your dad to let me in, but you can't effectively get those open. So one of the other reasons though that I like the chain lock on our back door, safety-wise, if something were to happen in my home, like God forbid a fire in the middle of the night, a firefighter can give that door a shove and overcome that chain and still provide safety to our house. These are purely for avoidance of injury. But there's a lot of great things on the market for door safety. My kiddo went through a stage where opening and closing doors was hours of entertainment. And that first one there is a really wonderful, unique device that I actually found across the way at the Safety Center for the American Family Children's Hospital. And this device has saved our sanity on so many trips, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. This little baby bends, goes under the door, let the feet down, that door won't move. So just some ideas there, and all of these are, widely available on the internet. So moving on to travel safety that I've alluded to a couple of times. Travel safety, like Amy said, this might be going to grandma's house, might be going to a conference somewhere for the weekend or a hotel for the weekend. It might be getting on an airplane and going somewhere. And what are the things that we can do to help keep our kiddos safe? My husband will tell you every summer we take a trip up north, usually rent a cabin somewhere on a lake. And so our first priority when we arrive is I survey the cabin. I've usually already looked at, flipped our slide here. I usually have already went onto the website when I picked the cabin. I figured out how many bedrooms there is, how many doors there are, how many doors in and out of the house. And then I take my bag of tricks with me. And then if I have to, I go to Walmart, because almost everywhere there's a Walmart. And maybe I have to buy a baby gate, but that's $26 worth of sanity for me. That makes a week-long family vacation a whole lot more enjoyable. So some of the other things that we've used, temporary tattoos is a great idea. They're available on the internet. You can even get them customized actually with your own information on them if you want to. And you can put them on for a day. Obviously they'll last for a little bit, but they're great for like a week-long family vacation if you want some more visible temporary ID. I also found this from, my mom sent this to me. There's the budget version of the temporary tattoo. Now I will say it's a great idea. It wouldn't work at my house for two reasons. One, I'd have to be able to hold my son still long enough to write legibly on him. And two, I'd have to wait for the new skin or the Skin Shield liquid Band-Aid to dry. But if your kid will hold still for it, it's a great way for going to the zoo, the park, the state fair to have that little bit of extra assurance. We do have these at our house. I ordered them from a company. It's just a temporary bracelet, looks like a water park bracelet. Initially when I got them, my son wouldn't wear them because he does have some tactile sensitivity. So typically I put them on his ankle under his sock. Is it highly visible? No. But I also know that if someone finds my nonverbal child, it's not going to take too long before they're going to start looking at him to figure out, is there anything identifying on this child? So I usually hide it under a sock, and that's enough to distract him that he forgets that it's there. Electronic tracking. Lots of products here available. Amy and I are just going to talk about a few of them. Electronic tracking originally started for us last summer when we decided to take a car trip to South Dakota. So it originally started as a travel safety, and at this point in our life it actually has morphed into an everyday routine for us. This is actually a device that we use at our house. It's called TraxPlay. I brought it along today, so my son is hopefully safely in my husband's care today. So this is a GPS tracking device that my son wears every day. It's rechargeable with a little USB port. We plug it in every night at bedtime when he goes to bed. He wears it every day in this cute little elastic band. I actually just bought this on the internet on Amazon. This is designed for, it's a pediatric running belt, like to carry your cell phone or your keys. They're great for medical devices for kids also. They actually, I figured out, have a little port on it for your insulin tubing for kids with insulin pumps and such. And it is a nice stiff clasp. So that means that Michael can't get this off yet. I'm sure there will come a time when he can. So that particular device, I did a lot of research when I was looking for a device because there's a lot of pros and cons and choices, and we have a slide in a few minutes to show you that. But this particular device was $100, and then I purchased 2 years of data service for it for another $100. So for $200, I've got 2 years worth of GPS tracking. One of the great parts about this device is it links up with my cell phone, and it will send me alerts based on how I have it set. So every day I get an alert when Mikey enters his school parameter. I get an alert about the right time of day every day when Mikey leaves his school parameter with the babysitter, so I know if he hasn't left the school parameter, I need to make a phone call. It also gives me great alerts, like if he's traveling more than 31 miles per hour. So if he's in a car with someone when he shouldn't be, I'm going to get an alert that says, hey, he's going more than 31 miles an hour. I said it because, everybody speeds a little bit over the 25 in town. My husband's like, why 31? So the other really cool aspect of this particular device that we love is the app for it on a phone is free. So we have that app on Grandma's phone. All of our babysitters have it on their phone, my husband's phone, and it has an active recovery phase that uses the camera on my phone. So I literally can pop Mikey's tracker up on my phone, put it into recovery mode, and hold my camera up. And as I pan, it will tell me in what direction, how many feet or miles away from me he is, so that I can then proceed to go find him. So very cool, but there are lots of cool devices. That's another one that we looked at when we purchased the one that we did. AngelSense is also a GPS-based system. This particular device is a little bit more expensive, but has an SOS feature, if you see that little button there. So especially for some of our older kiddos would be able to push it if they needed help and to send an alert. The other thing that's really kind of interesting about this one is it has a listen-in feature. So you literally can hit a button as a parent and you can hear what is the audio that is in the environment with your kid right now. So it could be great for some situations to know if there's something going on, or if you just want to know how is school going today. So,
there are many devices, as Julie was saying, and one of them that we sort of is a good starter product, I would say, is my Buddy Tag, and it is made of a very soft plastic. It works with a smartphone, and the difference with my Buddy Tag is it actually uses Bluetooth technology with the cell phone, so it is not a GPS tracker in the same way that the AngelSense and the Trax is. What this would do is you can set up a perimeter from your cell phone, basically, and if your child goes outside of that perimeter, then your cell phone alerts with a very loud sound. So this is a lot cheaper. It's about, I think it's under $30 at the Cole Safety Center across the street, or you can order online too, and then you just download the app. There's not a monthly fee for this one, so it's just a lot more affordable for some families. So we just wanted to make you aware of that too. And then this is yet another product which actually goes in the shoe, and it's used both for adults who have Alzheimer's, for example, but also can be used for children as well. It is similar. It has an app that works with the phone as well, and is just another option for some folks who absolutely can't tolerate something on their wrist or their ankle.
So I put together just a little bit of, and there are lots more pros and cons probably than I thought of, but I put together just a little bit of a pros and cons on the GPS devices. The GPS devices are pretty widely available. We've just picked a couple to show you today, but if you go to Google or Chrome and type in GPS tracker, special needs tracker, special needs GPS, you're going to find many, many different options to take a look at. There's a wide price range, as I mentioned. The AngelSense one, depending on the package you purchase, is somewhere between $40 and $150 for the device. Their monthly service is somewhere between $33 and $45 per month. So some of them are a little bit more expensive, but again, more features. Some really with a nice small tag, just like the Buddy bracelet. Most of them are small in size with the intent that we need to find a place or a way that our kiddos are carrying them on them. They work well in most outdoor locations. They do not work as well indoor, and anybody with GPS will tell you that. We chuckle, I need to adjust the perimeter for my son's school because when he is in the art room or the music room, it believes that he's sitting on the driveway of the house across the street from the school. So I get alert about 8 times a day when he goes to specials, and I need to fix that. So and it's just because the inside location in the school there doesn't get a good signal. Typically are tracked with a personal cell phone. That's pretty much the widest way that most of them are used. I will say that that's one other limitation. I think I'm sorry, they're rechargeable on my Pros. And the listen-in capability. So on the cons, as I said, they don't usually work well indoors. We also have figured out that they use the cell phone service to send that signal back. So sometimes it can be a challenge if you're in an area where you don't have cell phone service. So we ran into that on the trip in South Dakota that we purchased it for. When you're in the middle of the Black Hills on Needles Highway, we don't have good cell service, so we didn't have good tracking capabilities there. Most require a monthly data plan, as I mentioned, which can vary from like the one that we have for $4 a month up to about $45, $50 a month. They're not typically waterproof. Okay, so you know, can you put them in a plastic bag and get a little more time out of them for water, like running the sprinkler? Yeah, I suppose you could, but they're not typically waterproof, so that can be a drawback. Varied battery life on a single charge. When we first got the Trax device, it could only keep a full battery for about 6 to 8 hours in our environment because of where it lost cell signal and such. They did do a update to it, and we now can get a good 12 to 14 hours out of the battery life on that. They say up to 3 days. I haven't found that scenario yet.
Another type of tracking technology is radio frequency tracking, and some of you may be aware of those programs. They're called Project Lifesaver is one, or CareTrack is one that Dane County uses. These are primarily used by law enforcement agencies, and the technology is different. So there is a band that a child wears, so it does have to be something that they can tolerate, but there are lots of ways to make that adaptable. Some families put them over terry cloth, wristbands or something like that, so either on the wrist or the ankle. And then if your child were to go missing, you call 911, and for example here in Dane County, the Sheriff's Department would come out with telemetry equipment, so looking like big antennas, and sweep the area, and that will find your child. So it's highly accurate, but it does have that time element. So it works well where there is not good cell service for families, but then there's sort of a delay of waiting for law enforcement to arrive to start that search. And I know we're getting short on time here. We wanted to assure you that Julie and I are going to be available at the break and after to answer questions, and we would really love to talk more about safety with you all. So some of the pros are often more expensive, used with law enforcement. The batteries have to be changed extremely regularly, so like the sheriff will come out to your house to do that. But they do track well indoors and outdoors, and some offer a waterproof function as well. So some of the resources that we wanted to make you aware of are the Big Red Safety Toolkit. And again, this is on our list of safety resources out there. This was specifically developed for children with autism, but can be used across the board. There's nothing particularly autism specific. It has really great tips in here. Lots of scripts for sample social stories, sample safety plan to share with law enforcement. We also just wanted to mention, as Julie did earlier, about the Cole Safety Center, which is across the street at American Family Children's Hospital. They provide safety equipment, tools, consultation items at cost for families. So there is a savings in going there. We really recommend that if you're going to do that you set up an appointment ahead of time. They will do car seat consultations, and those typically last 2 hours. They are very, very thorough, but can be extremely helpful if you have a child with a different size body who might need more support than typical, or is an escapee out of the car seat. They also have strategies and tools to work with that as well.
Couple of references for our work today. So that's what we have for you this morning. One of the things I did forget to mention to you when I was talking about travel safety, I also carry in my bag of tools I have down here a spray bottle of Goo Gone.
All right.
Because people are like, Okay, you just stuck this thing to the refrigerator in a rental property, now what? Goo gone. 3M is a wonderful company, that's all I can say, because I can scrape that, especially if it's only short term, they scrape off really easy, a little Goo Gone with paper toweling, and it's just like new. I haven't had to lose a deposit yet. So, yeah.
With regards to travel, would you suggest, I mean, if you're staying stagnant in a city for obviously a few days, would you suggest notifying law enforcement there as you would at home?
That's a great question. I can tell you personally that we didn't when we were traveling, but I don't think there would be any harm in it if you were staying. I mean, I think that a simple phone call and can I send you an email with a picture just in case we would need you, probably doesn't need them to come out and meet you like they often do in your community, but I think it'd be a great idea. It wouldn't hurt a thing. Yeah. Yes?
One of the things that I'm helpful caring group for families with special needs, and we had the law enforcement come in, and what they suggested as you're traveling, just take a little note card, put it to the car seat, if your child's in the car seat, giving them some basic information. Should you be in an accident with some emergency, that gives them something to go by, like doctors, what kind of conditions don't we look out for.
That's a
Sure.
great.
That's a great idea. It's a great idea. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have.
I think we're done with time, but like Amy said, we are happy at the break. And like I said, if people want to come and look at some of the things that I have, ideas, please approach us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Liz Hecht, and I'm going to be talking with you about some considerations for supporting decision making for young adults when they turn age 18. I work here at the Waisman Center. I'm the specialist for public policy in our UCED, the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, and also work with our resource center with Amy. The concept of supported decision making is an emerging idea in the disability world. And oftentimes when we hear discussions about supported decision making, it's couched as an alternative to guardianship. So I'll talk about both of those parts of supported decision making. I want to remind you that we have a fantastic resource center. There's a table outside, so that if you have any questions about anything you hear about today, and in this case about supported decision making, we have people you can talk to. Our resource center is located next to our clinic waiting room. You can stop in when you're here for clinic. We have an 800 number. And we'll talk with anybody who has questions about anything related to kids with disabilities and special health care needs. So if you hear anything today and you want to follow up and talk to someone, please look us up. We're happy to help. So 18 is kind of a magic number for young adults. And how many people have a child or a young adult where you are going to be thinking about what happens when they turn 18? How many people? Okay. And how many people do you think will be in support roles, helping families make decisions around decision making or young adults? Okay, a few of you. So this is really important for families to be thinking about, for individuals who support families, whether it's in clinical settings, school settings, human service settings, or friends and family. When a young adult turns 18, their status under the law changes. So they become legally responsible for the decisions that they make. And they can do things that they couldn't do before the age of 18. They can vote, they can enter into contracts, they can join the military, and do many things that they couldn't have done under the age of 18. And just because a person has a disability, there's no assumption under the law that they have any different status for making those decisions than anybody else. So when a young adult is unable to do some or all of these activities, we talk about them needing some type of supported decision making. And we know that decision making is a learned skill, right? I mean, a young adult doesn't turn 18 and suddenly make good decisions. And many of us might think that no young adult when they turn 18 can make good decisions, right? Any of us who have had teenagers. And kids with disabilities may have had different experiences that put them at an increased disadvantage to make good decisions. So one of the factors for our family culture and how we make decisions is what our family history and culture is. So some families may be more patriarchal or hierarchical, or may defer to elders in the family or the community to make important decisions for young adults. So the family's cultural beliefs and history about decision making is an important factor that informs that family style around decision making. But in addition to that, we know that everyday experiences help kids and families make good decisions and be prepared for the kind of lives that adults lead. And we know that children with disabilities typically have fewer opportunities to develop the skills around decision making. And that could be because their care needs or their health needs require a level of support that is atypical for other kids, so that they have family members with them more often in situations where they might otherwise be making decisions on their own. We know that children with disabilities sometimes have less access to the types of experiences in school, whether it's school clubs, after-school activities, school field trips, that may give them opportunities to do things separately from their families and with their peers. And oftentimes, kids with disabilities have less opportunity in the community to do things on their own. So are they walking to the store by themselves? Are they playing in the neighborhood with other kids on their own? Are they going over to a neighbor's house, for example, without a family member? And there's no value judgment about this. Our kids need a level of support that may preclude those opportunities. But it means that they are not having the same access to making mistakes and skill building that their peers might be having. And similarly, families may need information and skills around teaching decision making that is different than their typically developing children. So for kids who may have very complex disabilities, we might not know how do we help our child make decisions. What are the opportunities they have if they can't do anything on their own? And then both families and kids need sort of those experiences to develop skills. So if your child never has a chance to be apart from you in a community setting, families are not going to develop the skills to let that happen, to not be terrified about what could happen. And kids aren't going to figure out, how do I cross the street, or who do I ask for help, or how do I at a basic level interact successfully with my peers, and get the feedback when they make mistakes to do it better next time. Okay, so I have on here a link, and this the PowerPoint will be on the website, so that if you go to the Wasteman Center website, all of the links that I talk about here, you can access through the PowerPoint online. So the picture I have is just a sort of a reminder that when our kids are little, they are surrounded by parents, family, siblings, and we hold them close to us and take care of them and keep them safe. But as they get older, they are going to have an opportunity, hopefully, to make decisions, and those won't always be good decisions. So these are both pictures of my kids, and the second one is my son flipping his wheelchair over, going down the driveway, because he wasn't aware of the culvert at the end of our driveway and turned over. He wasn't hurt, and it helped inform his navigation in the community to pay more attention to curb cuts, more attention to culverts, and hopefully not do that on a hard concrete surface where he might really get hurt. And I would say that I was absolutely terrified when this happened. He was laughing, but it made me know that the next time he gets 10 feet away from me or 20 feet away or out of sight, that it might be okay, and that I might need to let that happen so that we can both experience what happens when he makes a bad decision. And so also around decision making, for those of you who are in the position of supporting families, whether you're an extended family member, a clinician, a professional in the community, conversations about decision making can start really early. And so, to ask families, what are you thinking about when your young adult turns 18? Has anybody talked with you about what types of supports you might want to use to support your young adult's decision making? And share information with families. I brought one resource that we have here, and there's copies on the table out in the hallway that you can pick up, called Transition Healthcare Checklist, Preparing for Adult Life. And it has a whole bunch of great resources and information to guide families in a lot of processes related to transition as they become young adults, but in particular information about supported decision making. So there are resources that you can share with families if you want to ask them, what are you thinking about? There's lots of great information to share. There are also wonderful learning experiences for families and young adults. So, for example, we have a conference in Wisconsin called Circles of Life for families who have children with disabilities. It rotates between Milwaukee, Stevens Point, and Madison. This year, it's in Stevens Point at the end of April. And it's a wonderful, wonderful place to learn. It's a 2-day conference, and families can learn about a huge range of topics that might be of interest to them. Similarly, at that conference, but other opportunities for young adults, there is something called the Wisconsin Youth Leadership Forum, where young adults can go for a week. All of them have disabilities, can be in a very safe and supportive setting, but can really explore their self-advocacy, decision-making, skills, community navigation, and be on their own for a week, like many of their typically developing peers might have an opportunity to do if they go to camp or to some other type of learning experience. The Circles of Life conference also has a separate track for young adults, so kids could be on their own there, and families could attend but not necessarily have to be together all the time. So start the conversation early, find out what's out there, think about what happens, so that when a child turns 18, we want families to be prepared for how they want to begin to approach decision-making supports. And there are a number of legal tools available, and I suspect you're familiar with most of these. So at a minimum, in a medical setting or school setting, oftentimes families are asked to sign a release of information. So for example, in order for my insurance company to bill my healthcare provider, I have to sign a release of information saying that healthcare provider can share enough information to bill my insurance company, right? So they can be, they're very common in our world and familiar to us. When a young adult turns 18, a medical provider can no longer share information with family members. I was astonished to find this out. It just hadn't occurred to me that suddenly my status as a support person to my son in healthcare settings would change. But that can be addressed either prior to turning 18 or just after turning 18 to signing a release of information. So you can talk with your young adult and say, do you want me to continue to help you when you go to your doctor's appointments? And if the answer is yes, they can sign a release in whatever way they indicate consent that it is okay for your medical provider to continue to share information with you and to interact with you. So that's one level of putting in place a support for decision making called a release of information. Schools will do this as well. So if you've participated in an IEP process when a child turns 18, a school district will often ask for a release of information to continue to include the family in the IEP process. A next level of legal tools to support decision making is called powers of attorney, and you can have powers of attorney for healthcare, for finances. If any of you support elders, you may know that there's a lot of education around putting in place powers of attorney for healthcare, so that if that elder becomes unable to make decisions and or wants to communicate their decisions around end-of-life care, a power of attorney for healthcare with advance directives is a tool to do that. So, for example, when shortly after my daughter turned 18 and she went to the emergency room, the first thing they asked us was, do you have powers of attorney for healthcare? And we didn't for her. Of course, I had done it for my son, but I didn't, generalize it to my daughter, who doesn't have any disabilities. And they helped us do that while we were there. They had a social worker come, fill out the power of attorney for healthcare, and have it in place. You don't need to have an attorney to do powers of attorney. There are free forms on the Wisconsin Department of Health Services website that you can download and guide you through the process of filling them out. I know UW Hospital also has a great powers of attorney form with sort of an explanation tab that runs parallel to the form that explains what this legal jargon is like. Is this important or not? What does it mean? There's a sort of a real plain language side by side with it, which is a really nice resource. So you can do this yourself, and it says if my young adult is unable to make decisions because of a health situation or something else, they will designate someone to be that decision maker on their behalf. Okay. And then the next level of sort of legal tools and also a more involved legal process and change in rights is called guardianship. And you can have limited guardianship, which says there are some decisions this young adult can't make, and designates a guardian to make those decisions. But there are some decisions they can make. So with limited guardianship, for example, it might say they can vote, they have the right to vote, maybe to enter into contracts, but not the right to make other decisions. And then full guardianship removes all of the rights that person might have to make their own decisions and designates a guardian to do that. And guardianship is a legal process that typically involves a judge and an attorney, and there's a determination of incompetence. So it's a much more, it's a much deeper process, both in what it takes to put guardianship in place and the change in legal status and civil rights that individual has or loses in that process. So one of the reasons that in the disability world the discussion of supported decision making is becoming more and more prevalent is because the number of people, adults with disabilities under full guardianship, has tripled in the last 20 plus years. So and 90% of those guardianships are full guardianship. So I think that there are two things that are happening. One, people are becoming more aware that you might need to do something, and because we have more clarification about people's decision-making rights, for example, with HIPAA, which says, we're protecting people's health information unless you do something. That people are being more and more educated about decision making. So that might be one reason there's an increase. But then along with that, there remains a very strong preference for people with disabilities to recommend, on the part of those who support them, to recommend full guardianship. and not necessarily an awareness or familiarity with some of these other types of decision-making supports. So this article was from 2015, so it's fairly recent. And it shows us two things. One, if you look at on the right-hand side, the blue line shows that the people that families are most likely to have frequent contact with. So, for example, school personnel, human or social service personnel, and medical personnel, over 70% are recommending guardianship as a first option. And then if you look on the left-hand side, you can see the top bar shows you how many professionals are talking about supported decision-making. And that's many less than 25%. So families are getting information from trusted professionals that steers them towards guardianship before helping to educate them or giving them information about other resources. So no wonder the number of full guardianship awards are increasing, right? Because we're trying to do the right thing, and the information we're getting is telling us the right thing is full guardianship. The other part of the study that I found interesting is who guardianship is being recommended for. And I was really surprised at the data around deafness, because I think that many of us who work in the world of intellectual and developmental disabilities might say, oh wow, deafness all by itself, that's not that big a deal. Well, of course it's a big deal, but there's so many tools out there to help reduce the impact of deafness if that is the only condition. Yet that's the group, the highest number of people who full guardianship is being recommended for. So that is interesting. And then if you look at intellectual disability, developmental delay, multiple disability, not surprisingly, traumatic brain injury, those conditions are particularly prone to have professionals recommend full guardianship in those with those types of disabilities. So there's been a real movement within the intellectual developmental disability world to kind of push back on the assumption that full guardianship is needed, and to encourage people to think about other options and whether those other options might be enough or used in combination with other types of legal strategies. And this is called supported decision making. So supported decision making is an approach to provide assistance to individuals without imposing sort of long-term loss of civil rights, personal liberties through the guardianship process. And it's an alternative through which people seek out friends, family, trusted people in their community that can help them think through decisions that they need to make, and have a structure around them to help them make good decisions. So this is an example of what supported decision making could look like. And as we think about what types of decision making tools to use, particularly for young adults, some of the questions we want to ask is, what is that person's learning trajectory? So as I said, we know many 18-year-olds don't make the best decisions, but they learn over time. So why would we assume that a young adult at the age of 18, particularly one who may have had fewer opportunities to make decisions and practice decision making, would be any better at decision making than any other young adult? But with those opportunities, when they're 20, 25, 30, might they develop skills around decision making and know how to use the supports around them to make good decisions? So some questions to ask are, how do you as an individual make decisions? And who do you ask for help? And that might be a guide to what kinds of supports might this young adult need. And also to reflect on, I bet none of us are free of having made a bad decision. And when we did make a bad decision, what did it teach us, right? And so to offer and expect that a young adult with disabilities would need some of those same opportunities. So this STAR chart gives some ideas in a wide variety of domains that a young adult might seek support. You heard a great presentation earlier about how technology might be helpful in keeping someone safe. So if we are worried about that young adult decisions about where they go in the community and when they do it, or decisions around finances, there are lots of technical tools that can help with that. So you can work with a bank, for example, around monitoring an account, and you can reduce the amount of money at which someone could make a withdrawal, for example. So no withdrawals over $20. Or if there is a withdrawal over a certain amount, the bank alerts the person who has the account, and if it's a joint account, both members. So there's lots and lots of tools that everybody can use that's available to all of us as community members. We can think about in the area of community-based supports. We heard some discussion about how do we work with law enforcement and other safety supports in our communities. There's a great resource in Dane County called Night Owl that can set up monitoring for someone who's living on their own in the community, so that if that individual is up and moving around at night, there are gizmos, for lack of a better word, that can alert a monitor that they are up and moving around. There can be cameras that monitor that. There can be door locks that alert that a door has been opened. So it's possible for people to be safe with a whole array of interesting supports that can help them make good decisions, like don't leave the house at 2 o'clock at night. So this is again available, and I've given you a link to it to just provide some ideas about what does supported decision making look like, and how do we use our communities, our formal support systems, and our informal support systems like extended family, friends, and neighbors to help support good decision making. So I want to just touch very briefly on why this discussion of guardianship is becoming increasingly important. So we have a generation of young adults, and I'm going to jump through this just a little bit, who have been raised in inclusive schools, inclusive environments, and have been more connected to their communities than most generations of people with disabilities prior to this. And those young adults are being raised to think that they are capable, that they have power and authority in their own lives. And guardianship is completely the opposite of that. We also have the mistaken belief that guardianship might keep people safe. But in fact, what the court decides is, what is this person's functional ability to make decisions, not do they make good decisions. So guardianship isn't a protection against bad decision making. Our young adults can still do things that would be harmful to them. But nonetheless, the court is making a decision. And I think one of the things that, as a parent, really sort of made me take a step back is, what is the impact on my child's sense of himself and who he is as a human being and a citizen if I'm going to do something like, in a legal process, say you have no capacity to make good decisions. You are actually not this strong, empowered person that we've told you are for the last 18 years. So there are important reasons to do guardianship, and I don't want to minimize those. But from a philosophical point of view, there are also important considerations to be thinking about with guardianship. So what is the impact of telling someone that they don't have the same rights to citizenship that their neighbor does? And what does that mean about how they would be viewed by the people they work with and by society when we say this person is not capable of participating in decision making in the same way or with supports as the person next to them. And it can put them at risk for things. So if we tell them you don't have the capacity, we may not also tell them what their rights are. And if we don't know what our rights are, we can't protect ourselves. And if that person doesn't have rights, then they may not have the ability to say no in situations where that might be really, really important for them to protect themselves by saying no. And they can lose confidence and not have a chance to practice decision-making skills and move along that learning curve that we believe all young adults are probably needing in order to learn good decision-making. So there are a variety of great resources out there. One that I'll point out in particular is the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making. They've got a couple of great videos there and talk about some of the legal cases that really brought this concept to light. And one of them is about a young woman who had Down syndrome and wanted to choose where she lived. And her family had a different opinion about where she lived. And in fact, this sort of kick-started the whole discussion around supported decision making and the National Resource Center to really raise awareness about this issue. So with that, I will stop and encourage you to explore this on your own with additional resources included in this presentation, and probably I can take a couple of questions. Okay. Any comments or questions? Yes.
When you have a power of attorney made out, do you have to share that with your local hospitals, doctors anymore, or how does that?
So medical professionals typically will ask if you have a power of attorney and ask for a copy of it. And then they would keep a copy of that as part of the electronic medical record. Or at least have a note in the record that says that there is a document that exists. So after I did it the first time with my daughter, when we went back to the hospital after that, or even saw her clinician, they could access that power of attorney without my having to carry it. Yeah. But what I would say is, if you move between different medical systems, then you have to do it for each one, because they aren't going to be sharing records across different systems if they're not interconnected. Yeah.
I do carry a copy of my daughter's guardianship papers, because if you ever go somewhere and something happens, you might just want, you don't have to have the original, you just have to have a copy so it states that you are the guardian and you have the right to make those decisions. And I have limited guardianship on her. She can vote, she can have a license.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we did the license.
A driver's license?
No.
Oh.
And I don't mean to butt in, but
No,
the
please do.
reason we did the license is because if she wanted to go fishing, you have to have a fishing license. Anything that obtains a license, we wanted that in there, that they have the right to do. Yes, we knew she wasn't going to have a driver's license, but it's kind of a general verb. If they want to get married, if they don't have the right to get a license, they can't get married. Most kids don't, but there are some people that have the ability to get married and have a life and independent. So you don't want to take too much away from them.
Right. And not all judges are as versed in limited guardianship as others. So it sounds like both you were well informed and the courts you worked with was well informed. Depending on where you live in the state, that can vary. Yeah.
So I think do you say that you have partial guardianship?
At limited.
It's called limited.
So
Mhm.
if you have full guardianship, can the young adult vote?
No.
Yeah, okay.
You have to watch. The full guardianship means you have full governing over that person on everything they do. It's full. It's not. The limited is what gives you, okay, they can do this, and they can do this, and they can do this. Where the full guardianship says, no, you make all the decisions, you do everything for that person.
With Unlimited, do you have the ability to select what you want to be able to have full over?
You do.
Yes.
Yep. Mhm.
Yes.
And so, I
And
mean,
you can change it too, just because you go, hey, I got guardianship right now, and say that maybe, like you said, 18-year-olds don't have those decision makings, you can go back to the courts and readjust it or change it. The one thing we have to do that we didn't have is if something happens to me and my husband, I have to get someone on my guardianship as a second. So say if something happens to me, she does have a sister who is now 21, that, you know, we have to have that discussion. Does she want to be the guardian over her sister, the limited guardian over her sister after something happens to us, or does she want us to find somebody else to do it? Because there are some siblings that don't want that responsibility.
well, thank you very much. I hope this was helpful as just a sort of thinking point as you try to make some of these decisions. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I work in the Down syndrome clinic, the biochemical genetics clinic, and the feeding team clinic. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the specific nutrition issues related to Down syndrome, and hopefully I can provide some strategies to deal with those issues. So here's my outline for the talk today. So first we're going to talk about the new Down syndrome growth charts. I think understanding those in detail are really going to help you understand the underlying nutritional concerns with Down syndrome. I apologize if I get a little bit too in the weeds with it. If I lose you, just remember that individuals with Down syndrome have different growth patterns, and obesity is a growing concern as individuals with Down syndrome age. And then we'll address some more specific topics down the line. So what is a growth chart? So a growth chart is an assessment tool that we use to monitor a child's growth as they grow and develop. It helps us to compare their growth and development to other children of the same age and gender. And so here I have the CDC growth charts, which were last updated in the 2000s. And so these growth charts were developed from the measurements of 64,000 individuals from the 1960s to the 1990s. And what they did with that data, that measurement, is that they developed this chart, which is percentiles or curves of typical growth patterns of children in America. For the most part, individuals follow a growth pattern. Individuals that are tall are gonna kind of follow this line. Individuals that are short are gonna follow that line. Individuals that are average are gonna follow that line. It's okay to be short as long as you're tracking on your growth curve. There's nothing wrong with being short. If you're tracking and being short, I'm happy. If you're short but you're falling on the growth curve, that's when I get alerted. So if you're doing this and then go like that. And then there's also the BMI curve, which kind of helps us show, is the weight appropriate for your height? Because obviously people that are taller are going to weigh more and people that are short are going to weigh less. So as a nutritionist, this is my very first screening tool that I look at to say, hey, do I need to dig deeper in the diet? If they're falling off their growth curve, do I need to assess how many calories they're getting? Do they need more protein? Do they need better nutrition? And this is kind of what alerts us to it. And so unfortunately, individuals with Down syndrome have different growth patterns. And those measurements, and those CDC growth charts were not based off of measurements with individuals with Down syndrome. They do not reflect growth patterns for people with Down syndrome. So if we plot them on the regular CDC growth chart, we're not going to get a real good sense of how they're doing in comparison to other individuals with Down syndrome. Whoops. So in 2015, the new growth charts came out for Down syndrome. Prior to that, there were Down syndrome growth charts that were created in the 1980s, but the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2011 decided to stop using them because they felt that they no longer reflected the current population, and that's due to medical advancements and better follow-up and treatment, which ultimately is going to result in a much different child with different growth patterns because that stuff really matters for growth. So what they did is they took the measurement of 637 children with Down syndrome, in the greater Philadelphia area. So this is what we call a convenience sample from 2010 to 2013. And they did the same thing. They generated those growth curves. And what this allows us to do is it gives us a screening tool that allows us to compare an individual with Down syndrome growth against other individuals with Down syndrome of the same sex and age. And it allows us to answer that question. Is the individual following their growth curve appropriately? Are they falling off compared to other individuals with Down syndrome? Are they growing how we would expect them to grow? And that's the big emphasis there, how we expect them to grow. Some important observations from this study were that the results were very comparable to the growth charts that were done in the United Kingdom, and that was a much larger study, so that kind of helps give us a little bit more confidence in these charts. The next important aspect was that they were a little bit better in some aspects compared to the 1980s growth charts. Weights were better during the first few years of life, and boys were actually a little bit taller later on in life. You know, that could be with better management, treatment, better follow-up with maybe speech therapists, occupational therapists, nutritionists, and whatnot. So with growth charts, so with growth and nutrition through the lifespan, there's kind of some really big implications. During infancy, we're often worried about individuals not growing enough, and that's related to feeding difficulties or complex medical needs and complications early in life, versus later in life, during later childhood and teen years and adulthood and so forth, things are pretty stable, and individuals with Down syndrome have kind of mastered their eating skills so that they can get adequate nutrition orally. And then we get the opposite problem where we're worried about them gaining too much weight, and there's some potential reasons for that. Maybe they have lower calorie needs. Their diets may not be the best. They may not be as active as they should. So what I did here, just to kind of show you the difference between the two growth charts, is I took a child on the Down syndrome growth charts and I just plotted them along the 50th percentile. So we have the weight and we have the height. And then I took those exact same measurements and I put them on the CDC growth chart. So as you can see for height, what a child tracking at the 50th percentile for Down syndrome, which is pretty good, would look like at the 5th or 10th percentile and even dropping down a little bit. Weight also pretty low. And that's just in comparison. So if you're a parent and you're getting plotted on the CDC, that could be quite alarming, but actually it's probably pretty great. And just imagine if your child was, plotting at the 10th or 15th percentile, which is appropriate because, some kids with Down syndrome are shorter, and that's perfectly fine. That on the CDC, that would be well below the curve, and that might, cause panic alarms. So it's really good to have this image to kind of make sure that we're on track with everything for the clinician and also for the parent. I did the same exact thing for the growth charts for the older children. One important note here is, so the same kind of pattern we saw with the height is much lower on the CDC compared to the Down syndrome, but the weight actually is comparable on the CDC and the weight. So weight was starting to catch up during older years. And the important aspect of that is that now we're not proportionate, so you have a higher weight and a lower height, which means higher BMI, which will be one of the next topics we'll break into. So BMI, or body mass index, is a screening tool that we use in medicine throughout clinic. It's a cheap, easy way to say, hey, is this individual normal weight, overweight, underweight? It's super easy. It compares weight versus length, and again, it's just a screening tool. It's not like a definite thing. So one thing that we know that individuals with Down syndrome have a higher incidence of obesity. Estimations range from 30% to greater than 50%. So if we take the BMI growth charts from the Down syndrome study that developed those, and we take those at face value, are those describing optimal BMI, or is that just describing merely what the population is? And so we don't want to use those BMI charts because that's definitely not optimal, because obviously there's a problem here. So in 2016, they did a study where they looked at the DEXA scans of 121 individuals ages 10 to 20 with Down syndrome. And what a DEXA is, it can help us determine the percent of body fat versus the percent of lean body mass. And what they did is they looked at individuals on their weight on the CDC BMI charts versus the Down syndrome BMI charts. And they found that the CDC growth charts was able to more accurately predict at greater than 85th percentile, those individuals who have a body fat percentage greater than 20%. And that's important because body fat percentage greater than 20% in the general population has been associated with things like insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, and so forth. Now, there's no specific literature out there that really ties that in Down syndrome, but I think that's a safe assumption that we can make. And just to kind of really visualize it, here in red is the Down syndrome BMI growth chart, and black is the CDC BMI growth chart. And so as you can see, and this was girls and this is boys. So as you can see, it really, as age progresses, it really starts to deviate, and it's much higher. It's actually 1 standard deviation above the CDC chart. And to give you some more reference, the current general population is half a standard deviation above, because the CDC is also pretty dated and obesity rates are climbing also against the general population, but BMI is a little, for Down syndrome, is trending a little bit worse. So one of the possible explanations for this is reduced calorie needs. So we know that individuals with Down syndrome burn less calories, and that possibly related to lower tone, maybe some different metabolic changes related to the genetic changes. We don't quite know. But in 2013, they did a study where they compared the energy needs of individuals with Down syndrome against their unaffected sibling. And what they do is indirect calorimetry. So when you burn a calorie, you generate CO2. So if you measure CO2, you can indirectly estimate how many calories an individual burns. So they basically put an individual under there and capture their CO2, and you can estimate that. And what they found when you correct it with age and body composition is that individuals with Down syndrome burn 78 calories less per day. You're probably like, 78 calories, who gives a whoop, right? But if you do the math, 1 pound of fat equals 3,500 calories. If you take 78 calories over 365 days of the year, that equals 28,000 calories, which would be equivalent to 8 pounds of body fat that this individual may have gained over that course of the year, or may have not lost with good dietary intervention, physical activity, and so forth. Now, the study did find that individuals with the lower calorie needs that was not a predictor of those who had the higher fat mass, so that was kind of not what they were expecting in that study. But I would argue that this is a younger population. I feel it probably gets worse past that, and it's only over a 3-year period, which also isn't a very good thing. It's a small study, and people that were really committed to the study can alter things. So it's probably not a major or main reason, but it probably does have impact. And we definitely know it's not the only reason. So there was a review of individuals, adults with intellectual disability, and correlated different behaviors with their obesity. And they found very strong correlations with obesity and soda intake, TV time, inactivity, and poor diet, like fast food and junk food and whatnot. So now we talked a little bit about the growth patterns. I want to talk a lot about the feeding challenges associated with Down syndrome. So we know that swallowing difficulties is extremely common in Down syndrome. There's anatomical differences in the area of the body that's responsible for swallowing. There's motor issues. There's sensory issues. This all impacts swallowing. And we all probably take our swallowing ability really for granted. It's a super complex movement that requires. And so I have a chart, just a list of signs and symptoms. And if your child is experiencing those signs or symptoms, that's something that you'd want to bring up with your doctor so that they can be addressed, whether it's referral with speech or occupational therapy or something like that. But these issues have strong nutritional impacts. So, if a food is too difficult to eat or you're choking on it, you're not going to like that food, right? Or you're not going to get enough nutrition because every time you eat, there's kind of a negative side effect. You're choking or it doesn't make you feel good. And, it can make nutrition not safe sometimes. So if you push too hard on feeding and you don't have good swallowing, you're not giving the right texture or consistency, you can put a kid in the hospital. So that leads to the next point of just learning to eat. So with these differences, individuals can just take longer to learn how to eat. So in the general population, we expect individuals to kind of follow a typical meal pattern that the family's doing after the first year of life. But with Down syndrome, it may take a couple years, may even take several in some cases. Some people may be on target. It's going to be so different. But the key point here is that transitions on textures and consistencies need to be based off of skill and not age. And so if there are challenges with swallowing or transitioning with foods, that would be a great opportunity to work with a speech therapist or occupational therapist to identify the modifications that are necessary for the diet to have better and safer nutrition. The best example is water. So often kids with Down syndrome don't drink enough water, so they end up being dehydrated. But maybe they can't handle that thin liquid, and so every time they drink water, they cough or it hits their throat, it makes them not feel good, so they're not going to drink it. So maybe if they need thick liquids, maybe they would drink more. Same with textures. Maybe they're not getting enough calories because the foods offered aren't the right textures, but maybe if we modified those textures, we would get better nutrition. So this is one of the only interventions in the literature that really has uniformly worked well in getting kids to eat new foods, or more importantly, fruits and vegetables, which we all should probably be eating more of. So one study was called Eating for Pleasure or Profit: The Effective Incentives on Child's Enjoyment of Vegetables. So this was done in the United Kingdom in 2010. It was cited in the Cochrane Review, which is which is like a data collection of studies that look at the same answer. And it was the only one that they really felt really promising about. So it was based off of 422 children, ages 4 to 6. And what they did is they did repeated exposures of a target vegetable. And those vegetables were carrots, bell pepper, sugar snap, peas, cabbage, cucumbers, or celery. And they actually chose their fourth favorite out of that list by doing some qualitative questioning. And so over a 12-day period, every day they would they would encourage them to taste that vegetable. So let's say it was an example, bell pepper. And then so what they would do is they would assess their intake before, immediately after those 12 days, 1 month out, and 3 months out. And there's 3 different groups here. One group was a tangible reward, so they would get a sticker if they took a bite of that carrot or took a bite of that sugar snap pea. The other one was a social reward, so they would receive a lot of praise if they took a bite from that carrot or bell pepper. And so they would say things like, "Oh, brilliant," because they would say brilliant because they're British. Or they would say, "That's amazing," or "You're a really good eater," so forth, and give that social praise. Then the other group they just did no reward, so they did the repeated exposure, but if they took a bite, the administrator didn't say anything or didn't give any reward. And then the other one is they didn't even do the repeated exposure, but they just did the measurements at the same intervals. And so these are the results from the study. So one is kind of a qualitative assessment of perception of the food from the child. Pre-intervention, immediately after intervention, 1 month out, and 3 months out. And then this one is actually the volume of food that they actually ate of the target food right before, immediately after, 1 month out, 3 months out. And so the top 2 lines are social praise and tangible reward. This is the no intervention group, and this is the this is the control group, and this is like the no praise or tangible reward. And so what you will notice is that praise and tangible reward were the best, and they went from thinking, "Oh, that cucumber's just okay," to "That cucumber's yummy." And then here's the volumes of how much they would eat at those intervals. And so before the target intervention, they're eating almost 2 tablespoons, not much. And again, this is average of the 420, so probably some ate none and some ate more. And then at 3 months out, they're eating up to half a cup of these target vegetables. That's an impressive amount, if you ask me, for a 4 or 6-year-old. And so that's a great study. That's one of the best studies out there for doing this sort of thing. The next study that I'm citing here is in 2014, and what it was parent-administered exposure to increase vegetable acceptance, a randomized controlled trial. So this study design was excellent, and the key, why I have it highlighted here is it was parent-administered. All they did was mail instructions to these parents, pretty much probably just describing what I just described, and did the same thing and got pretty similar results. And what it was, it's called the Gemini study. It's a couple thousand twins in the United Kingdom. And what they would do is they would do the intervention with one twin and not do the intervention with the other. And it was interesting. Yeah.
When you look at the receptiveness of it based on the rewards, you notice it's kind of the same to begin with, and then the lines split just a tad when you get either the praise or some sort of a physical reward. Which is the highest?
The external reward, the sticker, was the highest. Yeah, and so you see some improvement in the other groups, but it could be just actually the being the administrator being there and the exposures from there.
I was just curious if which one works better to begin with. And it sounds like
Tangible, but both work. I mean, it's not too far off. They didn't look at it, but they did mention in the study to avoid food-based rewards. And what they were citing in other articles that if you, let's say, use an M&M or a Hershey Kiss, is that the child will have increased preference for that reward, and then you're going to get hooked on that, and then you're in trouble, right? So these are two. There's several other studies like this, but those were the two I picked out. Now you're asking me, like, how do I execute these exposures when the kid sits at the table, arms crossed, and just doesn't want to put it in the mouth? Here's some of the strategies that we often enforce in clinic. So we really preach meal structure and consistency. Kids with generally respond pretty well to structure and consistency, especially kids with developmental disability. Having the set times for meals and set expectations really matters. And so we talk about 3 meals with 2 or 3 snacks. And these should be 2 or 3 hours apart with time limits, and only offer water in between these meals and snacks. No grazing. So no sipping on a cup of milk in between the meals, no baggie of goldfish or whatnot. So we want kids to understand the cycles of hunger and fullness throughout the day and really be able to respond to those, because if you don't respond to those, you're not going to know how to eat when you're older. And honestly, a lot of us have that issue. And the next aspect is if you're drinking milk in between meals, well, you're not gonna be hungry for that meal, and so maybe you just might eat the preferred food like the mac and cheese, but you're gonna leave the peas alone. So you really want good appetites so that they're more apt to want to go for it, to get that nibble, that bite, because again, just every time is one exposure on our path to victory. And then the next aspect is, if they know they're going to get a sandwich or a glass of milk after the meal, if they don't eat well, they have no incentive to eat. They need to understand that they're going to be hungry for 2-3 hours if they're not going to eat. And so you don't want that reward, and they'll be fine. We're not worried about them starving or wasting away. They'll make it up. And then the next aspect is division of roles. So it's the responsibility for the parent to decide what, when, and where. And so what means, a couple options, and try to do either or. So do you want carrots or do you want peas with your dinner, not being a short order cook and doing nothing but preferred foods. And then, like we talked about, set meal times and at the table. And then the child's decision is, how much am I going to eat? They have to live with those consequences of going hungry for the next 2 or 3 hours. And then the next point is developmentally appropriate food. So if you're trying to do a new food, it needs to be a texture that they can handle. If you do a texture that's too advanced, like trying to do raw broccoli, that's never going to happen. So you need to really work on that. And then role modeling is super important. So there's this cool study that was done in Ireland. It was the food dudes versus the junk punks. And it was a 6-episode series that they broadcast in a school, and it was kind of like Captain Planet, where they get their energy and their life force from the vegetables, like they used to get from the environment in that TV show. And so those superheroes really role modeled fruit and vegetable intake, and then the junk punks were the bad guys, and they were addicted to junk food. And so after broadcasting these episodes, vegetable intake increased at lunchtime at the school, increased at snack time at the school, and increased at home too, which is great. Now, what I want to remind parents is that when you have a young child at home, they often view you as a superhero. So if they see you eating fruits and vegetables, they might be more willing to eat them themselves. And often what we hear in clinic is, they don't eat fruits or vegetables, and then we often ask, like, what kind of vegetables and fruit do you eat? And sometimes that might be limited, and that could be part of the cause there. Make meals very social and positive. Kids love being at the meal, love sitting with their siblings and mom and dad and talking about things. I know it's tough to do family meals, but try to do it as much as you can, and have mealtime be very positive so that they associate that positiveness with food. Decrease the distractions. I know it's very tempting to put a kid in front of a TV or iPad so that they will eat, but they're not going to be able to connect the food with satiety or the taste or the texture, and that relationship is not appropriate. And again, they're fine. They're not going to waste away. It's okay if they're hungry. That's their consequence. Remember, their responsibility is how much. Don't force foods. That's regressive. It's just going to make them backpedal. Be a cheerleader when they try foods. It's a big deal if they take a lick or a nibble. That's one step. And then there's the concept we call food chaining, where the new food is something that's very similar to something they already accept. So here's a food chain where they like French fries. Who doesn't like French fries? Then you move to sweet potatoes. So you have a similar shape and concept. And then the next one is roasted sweet potatoes. So you just have a different shape, a pretty similar texture and taste. And then the next one is butternut squash, so same color, shape, and texture, but a different taste. And the next one's zucchini, which is a kind of a butternut squash. They're both zucchini, and I don't know, that might be a reach, but you can try it. So the next important thing I want to talk about is meal patterns, because that's really what I think works. I don't think diets work. So this is what I learned in school. And so if you look at this, you need 6 or 11 servings of carbs a day. So I'll eat 3 slices of bread, a bowl of cereal, and that puts me at 4. And then I'll have a big bowl of pasta. Maybe I'll be like 6 or 8. That's ridiculous. That's not appropriate. I don't like that. And we obviously moved past that. And we went to this, which I don't really have a comment on. That's kind of too abstract for me. But what I think they did next worked really well. Oh, no, that's not right. No, that's not it either. I don't know what happened here. But here it is. It's Choose My Plate. I really like this because it's the KISS method. Keep it simple, silly. It's really visual. It's really quantitative. A fourth of your plate needs to be fruit, or a fourth of your meal needs to be vegetables. It's that simple. It has all the food groups. And it teaches balance and variety. A good diet has balance and variety, because if you have a good mixture of fruits and vegetables, because you're doing those exposures, those are going to be lower calorie, high fiber foods, which is going to help with weight in the long term. Versus if you have a brown diet where you're eating nothing but grains, that's going to be a high calorie diet with low fiber, and that's not good. And then you have a dairy with each meal. You're going to get your 3 servings of dairy, so you get enough calcium and so forth. It's not that hard to do. There's just some basic pictures. Google it, you'll find a lot of other ideals. As you expand the selection of food with the repeated exposure, you'll have more things to fill in those boxes. Yep.
Where does potato fit in there?
Grains. Grains are starches, so yeah, I don't let that fly as a vegetable. So these are just my tips for food preparation, because I'm kind of a lazy guy sometimes. So you go to the grocery store, you buy a bunch of fruits and vegetables, cut up everything when you get home, and then that way, when you actually want to use it, you don't have to it's one less step to do it. So, cut up watermelon, get a watermelon, cut it all up. You're going to use onion and carrots in some of your meals, so cut those all up and put them in, Tupperware containers. Whenever you make a nice fancy recipe, like a nice soup or a chili or a sauce or homemade meatballs, make extra and freeze some, so that next week when you have a crazy schedule, you have soccer practice and other things to do, you can easily just pull that meal from the freezer and just reheat it, and that's a better option than doing a TV dinner or going fast food. My favorite way of cooking is roasting vegetables. Those look beautiful. You do not need to be a cook to do that. You just throw it in the oven on a cookie sheet, 425, 20 to 40 minutes. It gets really soft and has a nice crunchy texture to it. And that makes food more appealing, and it's great. So that's just my preference. And I'm cool with fresh, frozen, or canned. I don't really care. If you're going to do canned fruit, choose 100% juice, drain the juice. Canned fruit's pretty great since it's a good texture and it's easy. So it's one less step to do that vegetable. I'd rather do canned fruit than chips or crackers, right? And then canned vegetables, I'm fine with that too. Great texture. Drain the juice and rinse it over the sink. That'll wash off all the sodium, or most of the sodium. And the vegetables high in potassium, which balances with the sodium, so I'm not worried about that at all. And then frozen actually has some of the best nutritional content because it's picked at prime time versus your fresh stuff is picked way too early so that it's good when it arrives to the grocery store. Here's just some quick hitters. So don't drink your calories except for low-fat dairy because that protein's good and the calcium's good. So a glass of orange juice is 120 calories. 2 oranges is 120 calories. Now, if you drink a glass of orange juice, you're ready to eat pancakes, bacon, and sausage. You eat 2 oranges, you might be just done for breakfast, right? And the oranges have fiber. It has like 6 or 7 grams of fiber, which is going to help you poop and keep you full. And again, my plate equals variety equals complete nutrition. It's that simple. Don't count servings, don't count calories. Just have a healthy meal structure with variety. It doesn't need to be more complex than that. And then protein and fiber help with satiety. So if you have that My Plate thing, you're going to have those incorporated with every meal, and that's going to help keep you full. So that you're not munching in between. And then just the basic facts of how things work. We're designed to like sugar, fat, and salt. Our ancestors didn't have salt mines, and so if we found a salt source, we went crazy. It's called salt hedonism. It's an actual term. We can't control ourselves. And same with fat and sugar. Those are calorie-dense sources, and our ancestors did not have good access to calories. They didn't have supermarkets. So our brain is triggered to go crazy. We release dopamine when we eat sugar, and that's what makes us happy. And so my recommendation is just keep it out of the house because you don't want to set yourself up for a situation where you're like, I don't want to eat those chips, but they're in the cupboard just a few steps away. And then moderation is key. Don't absolutely avoid these foods, but having them once a week or eating out at Culver's once a month. That's figure out the right balance. But abstaining isn't worth it. Supplements don't replace food. At best, they're an insurance policy to make sure you're not having overt deficiencies, but vitamin or supplement's not going to maximize your health. It's not going to cause all these magical things. There's good research to show fruits and vegetables reduces risk for cancer. There's not really good research behind any supplement. And actually some trials with like massive doses of vitamin E or C actually were associated with increased risk for cancer. So with my opinion on supplements is first, do no harm. So if you're taking something that you bought off the internet, let the doctor know so that they can at least take a look. Obviously there's times and points where you need to do supplements, but that should be under the guidance of a physician and monitoring labs. Here's just a random kids activity pyramid. I like visual stuff that I found online. What I really like about this is it really, you think about exercise and you think about going to the gym or going running or something, but it doesn't have to be that. It could just be daily acts of life like sweeping the floor or walking the dog or taking laundry up the stairs and things like that. Or it could be on the weekend where you go to the park with the family or go to a Brewer game or do something and you're moving. Or it could just be a kid where you're running around chasing butterflies or playing tag. Or it could be organized sports where you're in soccer or t-ball or whatnot. And then also minimizing the screen time because screen time you're not doing anything. So you're not burning calories. And then sometimes you're eating chips or crackers and you're not even thinking about it. So the goal for any kid, and this is from the CDC, is 60 minutes of physical activity a day. I like to word that as 60 minutes of moving a day. And the benefits to exercise are to burn calories to help maintain a good weight, increases your mitochondria, which are your power plants of your body, and makes those more functional, which may help have profound effects on the longevity of your life and make your body more efficient at burning calories and whatnot. It helps build bone and muscle, so exercise makes your bones stronger. And it makes your muscles bigger. Muscles are really what drive your calorie needs. It raises your resting metabolic rate. It's associated with reduced risks for different diseases. It helps with mood, self-esteem, and stress. And there's even some preliminary evidence that it may help with cognitive performance in Down syndrome. Now, I think people exercise, they get frustrated that they don't lose weight fast enough, but that's not always should be the number one goal. There's a lot of other good things there. But it's really diet and exercise in combination, and over the long term, it's the tortoise and the hare. The next big thing is constipation. So what is constipation? It's not necessarily frequency of pooping, but is it bowel movements that cause you pain and discomfort, and that's when we get worried. And so constipation is very common in Down syndrome because of low tone, lower activity levels, poor fluid intake, low fiber intake, or just some medical complications that may impair with proper digestion. So what helps? Staying hydrated helps. If you're dehydrated, your body's going to pull that fluid from that poop, and it's going to be a hard rock, and it's going to be harder to pass. Staying active, you move, it's going to help that poop wiggle down your GI tract. Fiber gives your poop bulk, and so our GI tract kind of works like a tube of toothpaste, kind of pushing that poop down the tube. And so if your muscle contractions have nothing to grab on, then it's not going anywhere. Excessive amount of milk can cause constipation. That might be maybe issues with the milk protein, but more importantly, you drink a lot of milk, you don't eat a lot of food because milk's filling, and so you don't maybe get enough fiber. And then there's things that can be done if constipation just isn't working, but those should always be done under the doctor's supervision. And they do work, but again, work with your doctor. And constipation is not fun. It makes you a miserable person. And if you have trouble communicating your thoughts and your feelings, you're constipated, you're going to act out. And so sometimes fixing the constipation can help with behavior. And passing the baton, I'm not going to go too much in detail since I went way over, but here's some tips and just the hard-hitting points, some potential resources. If you're really looking for something in depth, this is a great book. It was written by a dietitian who has a child with Down syndrome and really goes in detail throughout the lifespan. And check out choosemyplate.gov. They got a lot of good resources, activities, and whatnot in there. And probably don't have any time for questions. I'm sorry. Yeah.
A lot of our kids, right, with Down syndrome, like you talked about, face challenges with constipation. Do you feel there's a connection to constipation and lack of absorption, therefore affecting growth?
I mean, we're really worried about diarrhea and malabsorption. If you're constipated, you're going to have pressure on your stomach, which can affect with appetite. I don't think it has impact with absorption or anything, but it can totally make kids not hungry if they're really impacted. And so it's important to have that good appetite so that they can have the good nutrition. But if they're having watery liquid stools or greasy stools, then I'm worried about malabsorption. And I don't think malabsorption is a necessarily big issue.
So what do you think of alternatives to grain like buckwheat and quinoa?
Yeah, those are great.
Whole
Yeah, those are whole grains. So.
flours?
Yeah, and that comes the grain part. So whatever you guys like, whatever you guys have at the house, and I encourage really for children with Down syndrome to eat what the family's eating. But quinoa is a great source of fiber and B vitamins and things like that. Yep.
Okay, hi there. I'm really pleased to be here. Dr. Maria Stanley invited me back. I did retire in December, but I'm really pleased to share this information that I've worked on for the whole 31 years that I've worked at the Weissman Center. And it was truly a privilege to be a part of the Weissman Center, and just watching the presentations today, it just reinforces what a great place it is. So what I want to share today is information about puberty and Down syndrome, specifically related, which is a part of sexuality kind of information. And what I wanted to share with you is that this really information is based on my experiences with families with people with disabilities and my colleagues over the last several years. Major points of the session. Puberty is a time of great changes for all adolescents, including individuals with Down syndrome. What's the impact for the individual with Down syndrome and the family? And other presenters were asking to raise hands about things, and I was thinking, what could I have you raise your hand about? And then I thought, well, we've all gone through puberty, so that would definitely be something you could raise your hands for. Comprehensive sexuality needs to be addressed for adolescents with Down syndrome using an individualized approach, and I'm going to share what I mean by comprehensive sexuality. Due to the potential complexity of these issues, address the issues together as a team, individual, family, and support providers. And I want to emphasize the word complexity, because clearly over the years that I've worked in this area, the sexuality is it's complex, and that just describes it. So if it's hard to figure out, or if it's challenging, or it brings up a lot of issues for you, that's the way it is, and it is a complex kind of an issue. There are resources available. I'm going to share some information about that. So as we all know, puberty is a time of significant changes. There's physical changes, growth, secondary sex characteristics, hormones. There's developmental and psychological things going on, increased self-awareness, sensitivity to the body, individuation from parents, importance of peers, emotional behavioral kinds of things, desire for more independence and privacy. And the things that I've been, the scientists and physicians and psychologists who've been doing imaging over the last several years have figured out that during adolescence there is lots of brain shifting. The brain is actually shifting in terms of where the cells are going and the neurons. So when we see all these significant changes happening in an individual with an adolescent, there really are changes going on in their brain. And there's a reason, there's a physiological reason that we see the kind of behavior, we see the kind of changes that are going on. So that should lead to empathy for us, because there really are these changes going on. So puberty, the impact on the person with Down syndrome and the family. Individuals with Down syndrome and their families are more alike than different than other youth and families. Puberty occurs at the same time and with the same changes as typically developing youth. Sexuality is an important part of total life experiences for all human beings, and that should be beings, and as well for people with Down syndrome, often linked to the need for sharing close, caring, and emotional intimacy with others. There are, though, specific issues that I've encountered that need to be addressed. So common issues that I've encountered focus on body changes, and this can be a reevaluation of sexuality education that hopefully we start with our young children when we're teaching them just naturally in the bath, what are their body parts, what's private and public, those kinds of building block approaches. But during puberty, there's some really dramatic changes happening. An example of what always comes to mind is I was doing a presentation, and a mother of a boy with Down syndrome told me that as he went into puberty, she noticed that he had been shaving his pubic hair, and she said to him, "So why are you shaving your pubic hair?" And he said, "Well, there's hair, so you shave it." And what that said to me is that we need to be sure that we're helping individuals understand their body changes and what's normal, what happens, what we do with it, how to groom it, etc. So the focus on, and that's a thing that's pretty obvious that people notice. Hygiene and grooming. These are issues that come up a lot, and I was fortunate to work in the Down syndrome clinic, and our occupational therapist spent a lot of time with families, because this is an area that can get fairly frustrating. I have a son who's an adult now, but we all know that you have to keep prodding your children sometimes to do hygiene and grooming, and for kids with disabilities for Down syndrome, this can actually go on longer than for other children, so it's a thing that becomes an issue. And independence might not come as soon. Awareness of sexual feelings. The first, there be things that, there may be masturbation, there may be starting to talk about boyfriends, girlfriends, rules for public and private behavior. These become, hopefully, the groundwork for this has been laid early, but these have become really issues so that individuals with Down syndrome know how to behave appropriately. Body ownership and boundaries for self and others, and again, this is one of the things that we need to pay attention to. Children that have learned that they can hug people and that may hug everyone all the time, so we need to think about when is that appropriate, and also for parents, I think about when is it okay for a child to be sitting on the parent's lap and how long, and that's a mutually satisfying thing, but we need to think about that sort of boundaries for self and others. And what's it teaching? Safety, we heard some issues related to safety. For sexuality, there's other kinds of risks and safety issues. Then there's behavior. There can be increased behavior kinds of issues during puberty, irritability, more kinds of challenging things. And then there's parent and family needs, and I want to emphasize that this is an experience for parents as well as for the individual, because the individual is becoming their own self. They're present this, and again, being a parent of a son, for me, I realized that all of a sudden I looked at him and it's like he's growing up, and he has these, he has sexual parts, and it's really it becomes a psychological issue, I think, for families to grapple with as well. So I always want to present this framework for addressing puberty and sexuality. One of the things I'm always careful to do is think about what the comprehensive definition of human sexuality is. I was at a presentation and a woman raised her hand in the back row, and she looked like an elderly woman, and she said, "Do you mean that you're telling me that my child needs to have sex?" because you're talking about human sexuality. And then I realized what I really need to do is make sure that we really think about a comprehensive definition of human sexuality with all of these factors in it, and it's not just the physical expression of sex. And then we can really think about, well, how do we support an individual in a holistic way? So there's self-concept, physical maturation, social maturation, there's feelings, development of relationships, sexual values, behaviors, expressions, personal rights, sexual learning. Sexual learning is something that I actually added in there after we were working. One of our colleagues is a sex therapist, and what she helped us understand is part of sexual learning is how we learn how our body responds sexually and how we learn about interacting with other people. Then there's sexual health and future planning. So factors influencing sexuality for individuals with Down syndrome, and some of the things we're very well aware of: communication, and that can be a factor, how someone communicates with others. Possible cognitive challenges. Almost all individuals with disabilities have some sort of differences in how they understand the world and how they learn about things. Incongruity between chronological age and developmental age. This is key, and we need to think about this. That we may, and early on when I was working in the clinics, I met a man who was 16, and he was pretty tall, and taller than I was, and he was fully physically developed, and I was talking with he and his family, and what I realized, and this just hits me because it was one of the first things one of the first people that I met, that he really was functioning more like maybe a 2 or 3-year-old in terms of his understanding of the world, but he was fully physically developed. So it was important for us to recognize that incongruity so that we could help understand what kind of support he needed and what his family needed. Because obviously we couldn't have the same expectations for him understanding about his body. Dependency. This is a real tricky kind of a thing, because for adolescents, they're seeking, and one of the developmental tasks is to seek independence, to seek one's own independence from parents and whatever. But there's the fine line between dependency and needing to give support and how to do that, and that's where the issue complexity comes in, because it's a dance that one has to do. Compliance, and this is a big one as well. We spend a lot of our time helping people be compliant with rules and with sitting and doing certain things and going along with us. But what we need to understand is that we also need to have individuals understand that they can say no and that they do have some volition about what happens in their lives. And again, those two areas, dependency and compliance, there's those fine lines, and it's complex. The nature of the disability, if you notice, it's kind of down far. More of the kinds of issues are related to these other things, but certainly the disability of Down syndrome, it more has to do with understanding and behavior that affects sexuality. There really aren't specific kinds of physiological concerns or differences usually in people with Down syndrome. Personal history, need to think about what has been their history, what have they had someone that's helped them understand about their body, what has happened with them. And we unfortunately, and this is critical to think about, that people with disabilities are at higher risk for sexual abuse, most likely from people that are familiar to them in their environment. So what I talk a lot about is, well, so how can we think about that and make sure that that doesn't happen? And some of that has a lot of that, and I will be talking a little bit more about that. But what is the person's personal history, and do they have they had education and support about these things? Strategies for education and support, and these are really, I like to always provide strategies so that you walk away with some concrete kinds of things. Think ahead, be proactive, and begin sexuality education in early childhood. And that's what we do with all children. And what I mean by that, again, if you think of comprehensive, it really is thinking about, well, in the bath at a natural time, are we labeling body parts? Are we labeling body parts? Are we labeling, nose, ears, chin, as well as maybe pubic area, penis? Do we use, and are we kind of natural about that? And do we do it and doing it in a private environment? And are we teaching private and public when it's appropriate, when the person understands it? Are we helping them understand that they don't walk out of the bathroom when there's other people around without covering themselves? And sometimes those things take time, and they take, but we need to be making sure that we're putting those things in there. Begin early with body awareness and social skills development. And again, that's what I was just mentioning. Progress to include relationship building, potty changes, and social behavior. And not to worry, it's never too late to start. So if you realize, oh my goodness, we haven't really done this, it's never too late to do that. Figure out what to teach. And this can really be kind of tricky. Approach the topic as you would for any other individual that age. However, you do need to individualize for your child with Down syndrome, both in the content and the techniques for teaching, and I have some specific suggestions coming up for that. Some training techniques, just in general, use simpler words, slower pace, much repetition, and these things will ring true for you if you think about education in general. Simpler words, slower pace, much repetition. Clear and explicit language. For sexuality, this can be tricky for us as adults, because it took me a while, and I was trained as a nurse, but I had to think about how I needed to say explicitly penis, breast, other kinds of words, and say them explicitly, and really think about how am I describing this information to a child with Down syndrome. I can't say plant a seed if I'm talking about reproduction, because they might actually take a watermelon seed and plant it in their vagina. I mean, we have to be and this is an area we have to be clear and explicit. If we're trying to help someone be more safe and make decisions around perhaps masturbation, touching themselves, we have to be clear and explicit. We have to say, you're touching yourself on your penis, it feels good, you need to do it in private. If we just say, don't do that here, go into your room, they're like, what am I supposed to do? What are you talking about? So that's where, and as for adults, we necessarily haven't had that experience being more explicit. It can be challenging for us as well. Teach in small sequential steps and with frequent reviews. Again, these are the kinds of learning techniques that the kids with Down syndrome are most likely getting in school. Keep lessons short and well structured. Information taught should be practical and relevant. So when we have, and again, it's when it's like at the teachable moment, when when a child is in the bath, and you can teach them those kinds of things. When they come out of the bathroom and they don't have any clothes on and there's other people around, gently taking them back and explaining to them or giving them that kind of instruction. So make sure that it's practical and relevant to life settings, and really think about when is it appropriate. One of the areas that I often help families think about is preparing a young lady or young girl for menstruation, and I talk with families about the timing of that. And so some families will say, well, I want to give it to them far in advance because they'll get used to it. Others, it's like, well, no, we don't want to do that, right? Because they're going to get nervous about it. So we have to think about the practical and relevant and kind of the timing of that. Although parents are likely the most influential and consistent teachers of sexuality, support providers who know the use, and that should be may, also have an important role in teaching sexuality, can help with resource materials. And this is where the team can come into play. And you may be surprised. You can talk to the other team members, and and that could be your neighbors, your family, school people, other people may have a helpful experience with this. But specifically, what I was thinking about with that one was what school teachers might be able to help with. Design alternative teaching methods for addressing sexuality, and that may be maybe some visual aids. One of the examples is to use a doll and actually some visual aids around menstruation teaching, and actually showing some visual kinds of aids about that. Assist in identifying resources in the community. There may be classes, there may be other people, that may be groups, there may be other things going on that could be helpful. And supplement and reinforce sexual concepts within community environments. And this is important, as if you as a team are starting to are starting to address these issues, make sure the rest of the team knows it and it's consistent among how you're addressing certain things like private, public, or other kinds of issues. As I mentioned earlier, it's important to consider your own emotional needs, and this could be family support providers, along with the comfort and knowledge for addressing sexuality. Know yourself, know where you're at in terms of how comfortable you are with this particular topic. Seek out emotional support as needed. This time of obvious changes in the adolescent can be challenging for parents, and so you find people that are helpful to you and reach out. examine your own attitudes in order to foster a positive attitude. It depends on, one of the things that I started with just when I started doing this area of sexuality is that you just naturally start thinking about your own experiences and to think about, well, how do I express myself related to sexuality? What words do I use? What behavior do I use? What are my beliefs? And it's helpful for us when we're providing support to individuals to think about what are our own attitudes, and in order to foster a positive attitude. Provide accurate information about sexuality. So maybe you need to read, do your own kind of brushing up. Now, sexuality doesn't change a whole lot, except for I think the thing that I've realized just recently is the whole gender identity is really important for us to have the appropriate language and to understand about those things. So it's really accurate information, and use a gentle and sensitive approach, very important. And I'd like you to, what I'm going to share with you a little bit is to consider the STARS guidebooks as teaching resources, of which I'm an author. And I want to reassure you that I don't make a whole lot of money off of this. So it's more or less, and basically my co-author and I, the reason that we published it was so that people could have this information, because it wasn't available when we started our work. So it really is a comprehensive approach to sexuality education, which I mentioned earlier. It's to support positive expression of sexuality and facilitate the learning of skills to prevent sexual abuse for people with disabilities, cognitive disabilities. It's a building blocks approach. So when I mentioned start early, our books provide specific kinds of experience or specific activities that start early in life and then build on as people get older. It's not a curriculum but a guide. Encourage assessment of needs and individualized training in their 4 content areas with goals and objectives. So the STARS model, as you can see, it's comprehensive. We look at understanding relationships, social interaction, sexual awareness, and assertiveness. And what we really, Susan, the co-author, and I took a look at, well, how do people with disabilities learn? And really breaking down the parts of it so we could think about, well, how then to build as building blocks approach and to build on all of these kinds of things. So how to understand a relationship. You can't really figure out how to interact with somebody unless you understand the relationship. You can't know what to do with someone to figure out, well, how do I behave with my neighbor? How do I figure out what relationship I have with that neighbor to be able to know what to do with that neighbor? And much of our learning, we have the capacity to understand the abstract world, comes naturally, or comes by living and being in the world. And for individuals who have more difficulty with abstract thinking, that doesn't come so easily to figure out what relationship do I have, and then how do I behave. So we broke these things down, and I'm going to give you some examples here. Understanding relationships, some of the goals in that particular chapter, building a positive self-image. How does one feel about themselves? People with disabilities often need help thinking about who are they. I call it mirror therapy. Having a child stand in front of a mirror and actually look at who they are and have that doesn't come so naturally to people with disabilities. Identifying people in one's life as family, friends, acquaintances, community helpers, and learning behaviors appropriate for each type of relationship. I present this because this has been one of the most useful tools that I've ever encountered, which is called Circles. And you don't have to have any kind of fancy anything. You can use a piece of paper and you can draw these circles. And it really helps the individual take a look at their social world. And you can start from the middle and talk about the private area. And you can say, well, private means when there's nobody else around. And what kinds of things do you do when in private? Well, you spend time by yourself. And as a child, as a person is maybe fondling themselves or doing some of that kind of private behavior, that's where you do it, in private. You go to the next level, and that's family. And these are things that you want to identify individually for the child. You can actually, some people put names in the circles. So family is whoever you identify as family, and it could be whoever you put in there, and then that's paired with the behavior. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But these are, so you can see it's increasing social distance. And you might put specific names in there, but this really helps. It's a visual representation. And you may not want to present all of this all at one time, but you can present this over time. And it is a helpful activity. I think I've already mentioned this. Teaches social distance and levels of familiarity, starting from the center circle, which is the self. Each new circle represents behaviors. So next we build on understanding relationships, we go to social interaction. Some of the goals are approaching, responding, conversing with people. So once we understand relationships, now we're figuring out what to do with those relationships, expressing preferences and making choices. And again, it's what you do in relation to other people, and building friendships, engaging in more mature relationships. Some of the activities is provide an opportunity to learn and practice social skills. So one of the things that we recognized early on is that you really need to have opportunities if they're going to teach social skills. You have to have people doing social kinds of things. So that's an important kind of a thing. And often we get in discussions about, should we have people with disabilities be with other people with disabilities? Should we have them typically, with typically developing people? And again, I think it's really individual. There's certainly some individuals get along better if there's all people with disabilities. Some people you want them to be in a mixed company, and that's great. But it's really providing the opportunity to practice social skills, and probably with the range of ages as well is important. Support opportunities for establishing and continuing satisfying social relationships. And often this doesn't have to be complicated. This starts really importantly with families, and you are providing opportunities by simply in your home, who you interact with, and then going out and doing things. Maybe going to the grocery store, talking to the neighbor. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it's supporting those opportunities and bringing your child along and having them experience those things. Teach social interaction skills using scripts or specific approaches and responses. Again, what I mentioned earlier is people with disabilities with Down syndrome who have more difficulty with abstract concepts may not get it, may not pick up on how to have those kinds of interactions with people. So you may have to give them, when you talk to your friend, you could say this, and you might have to prepare them with some of those kinds of scripts. And again, you can use the circles illustration, and you can, as I mentioned earlier, you pair the relationship with the social behavior. But it's how you identify that social behavior. It's, say, with the family. There's one man told me that he was struggling a little bit because in their social circle, and they have a wide social circle, and they belong to a church, and so there was quite a social circle that everyone hugs in that particular group, and so they were really struggling with, well, what do we do, because not everybody is the same social distance, and so we had to talk about that, and he had to come up with some strategies for that. Because the hugging was way beyond family for them, it went on with other people, and it got a little more complicated. But it may be that in the family, it may be pairing the family with a hug. And then it might be that in other people, it might be a big hug or a side hug. And then there's pair community helper and pair stranger, and really thinking about wave only or ignore. The next area is sexual awareness, and that's actually, when we think about sexuality, that's the area that people often think about. Some of the goals is positive self-image and sexual identity. Identifying male and female, or it should be probably gender, understanding public and private behavior, identifying body parts, differentiating between inappropriate and appropriate touching, and understanding sexual feelings and behaviors. So just some examples of activities of body parts. Simplify, use dictionary words, and what I mean by that is obviously penis, breast, vagina. And it's interesting because I've run into some families where they find those words offensive and they use other words. Well, the problem is that we need to have a common vocabulary that people understand. So if we're teaching people body parts, it's important for them to understand or to use the body parts so that other people know what they're talking about. I was at a presentation, and a preschool teacher raised her hand and said that she had a good example of this, that their little boy was in her classroom, and he said, "Teacher, my noodle hurts." And in her mind, from my upbringing, noodle meant head. That's for some reason that was well, this little boy, for him it was his penis, and she couldn't quite, and it took her a while to figure it out. So that was just an example of how we need to make sure that people say the words that are dictionary words, but we also need to simplify it. We don't want to give complicated kinds of anatomy. Really think about what are the words that are really important to know. Important to teach concepts of private and public. And this is really important. This is, again, I can emphasize this quite a bit. It's body parts and behavior, and there's some examples of using a picture of a female, and then that doesn't have any clothes on, but then having the individual put on what are the private parts, and you can have them draw a bathing suit on there. And there's those kinds of examples of really reinforcing private and public. And then there's puberty. Provide information about body changes in simple, understandable terms. And it may be that, depending on the individual, you may be thinking, well, or you may say you're growing physically, you're getting taller, and these changes are happening, and you want to think about it ahead of time about what do you want to say, and help the person understand that these are normal, healthy things that they're going through to feel okay about themselves. One of the things that I realized as I was going through doing this own education myself is that because I'm not a male and I don't have male genitalia, there's actually things that are unique to hygiene and handling oneself. For example, there is certain behaviors that males think about when they use a public bathroom, like where they stand and all these other kinds of things. And I didn't know anything about that, and I also wouldn't know how to do hygiene, for a penis necessarily. I could learn it, but what's the point of it? And then also I think males might feel the same around handling menstrual hygiene. Not that we can't learn those things, but that we should actually maybe tap into making sure that we're getting that information from someone who knows about those kinds of things. One of the areas that comes up a lot is inappropriate sexual behaviors or touching someone inappropriately. And probably over the years, that's one of the themes that I would get phone calls a lot about, touching others inappropriately. One of the things that, and people calling and saying that there's this boy or girl and they've touched someone inappropriately on their genitals, and now they're getting in trouble with, the school or even with the police. Most likely, almost 99.9% of the time, it's curiosity because of more immature behavior, or because they really don't understand and they haven't had education. It's not deviant. And I want to emphasize that. Now, yes, there are people with disabilities who do have deviant behaviors, and we can't deny that. But for the most part, it really is if the person just is immature, doesn't understand, or is curious. And if we think developmentally, when do people have a high interest in sexuality? Beginning is around 4 or 5, and maybe interested in seeing other people's body parts or even touching them. So developmentally, if the person, maybe that's where they're at, then we need to pay attention to that and think about that, and not leap immediately to deviance. Probably interested in others and have not learned how to approach. I said that already. And also, they may have seen others do the same thing, but they were not sophisticated enough to get away with it. And that's not that I'm blaming other people, but that may be one of the underlying things. And so we need to kind of do some, private investigation to think about what's going on in the environment. There is some red alerts, though, that if the behavior occurs suddenly and seems to be over-sexualized, may be related to sexual abuse, and that can be a red alert. One needs to take that seriously and think about it. And talk to your partner, talk to the physician, talk to helpers that can help figure that out. Assertiveness is the last area. Increasing self-empowerment through words and actions. Recognizing a situation as potentially dangerous. And there's learning to say no. Examples of activities. Paul White is a colleague of mine who was head of the Community Ties program. He retired as well. But one of the things that I learned from him is that while we're teaching skills for self-protection and how to behave, is provide a safety net of supervision. And this is again where we go back to dependency, compliance. What's our role as parents and caregivers, that we do need to provide a safety net of supervision, even though we want people to be as independent as possible, but we really need to make sure that they're safe. So we want to err on the side of safety instead of maybe having somebody go out on their own and do an activity or whatever. We want to make sure that we have supervision. Promote understanding of dangers, but don't use scare tactics. What I mean by that, and of course you can understand that, is that somebody's going to get you if you go do whatever, but it's really understanding the dangers. Teaching types of touch, good touch, bad touch, confusing touch. Those are things that in school often they teach these kinds of things, and work on cues for discriminating safe and unsafe situations. So in summary, puberty is a time of significant changes. There are resources and support to help, and youth and parents can make it through with patience, understanding, and communication. And these are the resources. And Dr. Stanley put a list of resources out on the table out there, and there's also some examples, there's some books and things that are out there as well. So that's helpful for you to take a look at that. And these are some of the resources. I think you have a longer list out there as well. All right, that's it.
I'll introduce yourselves, and Kimberly, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
Sure. My name is Kim Arndt. I am a parent of 3 girls. My oldest is 5, and I have twins that are 2, almost 3. And one of my 2-year-old twins has Down syndrome, Alexa. So that's my experience. I'm also a physician working at UW, and I work at Central Wisconsin Center, which is a place for people with developmental disabilities.
My name is Emily Ammer. I am from Albany, Wisconsin, and
My name is Amy Kavanaugh. I have 3 kids, Noah, who's 7, Maya, who's 5 and has Down syndrome, and Leah, who's 3. I live on the west side of Madison, and I'm in the Middleton School District. I currently stay home with my kids, but before that, I taught first grade for a few years.
My name is Teresa Drapal, and our family lives in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. I am the mother of 3 teenage boys, 19, 17, and my youngest, Isaac, is 14. Isaac is at the point, he just entered high school. He is unique in that he has had leukemia 3 times in his life, so we have spent a good deal of time in his life in the healthcare world. So,
great, Thank you. So we are going to start off with a few questions that the panelists really felt like would give them opportunities to speak about their own experiences, but we also want to encourage questions from you all too, so please really feel free to raise your hand and ask those, or to ask follow-up to whatever anybody's talking about. So I think we will start with a question for you, Emily, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, awesome. Can you please share about friendship and community involvement?
Well, I am friends with Gabby Cowie, and I have fun with her for lunch. And that one is Ashley Shepperson. She lives around in Brooklyn, and she's really competent. And now is Elizabeth. She is so funny. And sometimes she's my friend. Hang out sometime. Hang out sometime. Go to a movie. Go out golfing. Everything.
It sounds like really good fun with your girlfriends, Emily. I'm jealous. So you all enjoy going to the movies, you were saying, and did you also want to talk about some of the other activities that you're involved in? You were listing off a bunch of things.
Yeah. I have still danced for 12 years. So this is the last year of dance. So I compete in Oregon. So I cover dance. I did 4-H. I did photography for social camps. I am in for church activities of usher, nursery, no, that's part of the one is.
That is okay. So you are a dancer, you are in 4-H, and you're doing photography and raising calves too, is that right?
I'm not working with calves, but I'm working with calves.
Working with calves, okay. That is fantastic. And then were you also mentioning that you usher in?
I am an usher in my body. I was ushered in opening of this church, this new building. So I ushered up a place, go down the aisles, and would stand up or stand, wait, and go back.
All right. You are a busy young woman.
Thank you.
All right, fantastic. One of the other questions that we had for panelists is, what is one thing you would like to tell teachers or schools?
Right now, our daughter is in 4K, and I'm glad to say that we've had a really great experience with all of our teachers. I appreciate the daily communication that we have from our teachers. And being a former teacher, I understand the time that it takes, but being a parent, I understand how important that is and how much it really helps, because with some of her limited communication, it really jumpstarts what I can say. So even simple phrases of what she did that day, I really appreciate that. So I hope educators understand that all the little things that you do are so appreciated by the parents.
Thanks, Amy. Would anybody else like to speak to that?
Well, and I'd like to mention that our approach has always been, my husband and I, Joe in the back there, that we really see the education of our child. It certainly starts in our home, but it's a team approach, and so we have always tried to see educators as teammates. We're working together, as well as the community at large, really educating our children.
My daughter she'll be turning 3 in May, so we are just getting started into the school system, currently in the kind of transition process and the education or evaluation process. But I think one of the things that we're really hopeful for is that, they see her as a person, that they see her positive strengths, and that they're going to try to maximize those things. We've heard good things about our school district. We're also in Middleton. But that's kind of one of the biggest things, I think, is communication, and that's some of our fear in terms of her going to school is, how are we gonna have that team approach so that we can have good communication and make sure that she's kind of well supported.
Great, thank you all. Another question that we have that sort of relates to communication a little bit, or maybe it's not more of a question, but more of an observation that we had during our discussion together, was that sometimes there are changes that happen, either in routines and or in environments that may seem like not a big deal, but have really huge consequences for the person themselves or families, teaching staff, everybody, kind of unexpected change, and how that can be a challenge. Emily, you were nodding your head. You had something about unexpected change.
I was multi-college for right now. So a big case for me is cafeteria is big place for me. And all the pages are not working. Some of them are fine. And for shadows, little case for me. East 1 and East 2 is 0 times. What schedule is different? Or is it, what's going on? I don't know. I just looked my email. I don't know. I have no idea.
Emily, thank you so much. Emily was talking a lot, and let me know if I don't get this right, Emily, but that there was a big change in the school building for you. That there was, in the cafeteria, particularly all of these tables, you had your shortcut worked out for how you were getting from place to place.
Yeah, they give us a shortcut too.
And then they changed it, and then the elevators weren't working, and it was just really confusing.
Yeah.
And I think a couple of other folks, I don't know if you have any other unexpected kind of changes, or sort of looping back to that communication piece too.
Yes, I'd like to mention that Isaac is 14 now, and he attends the high school in Nahora. In terms of transportation, it's always this, his life in general is this balance between independence and safety. we wanted him on the regular bus transportation to the school. When he was younger, he took the van. We are not far from the school. We live on a busy street, and in part that had to do with safety for him, certainly. In the morning, however, he takes the regular bus, and in the afternoon he comes home on the van. Well, at one point during the school year, there was a change in the drop-off location on the end at the school system. It's a campus system in Mount Horeb between several buildings. They moved the drop location up the block about a half a block or so. But for Isaac, that was certainly a big deal. And the teachers were wonderful. The staff were good. However, the change had not been communicated from the bus garage and some of the administration to the parents or the teachers or the staff who are responsible for him. So he was on the sidewalk for longer than he ought to have been in the morning. So it turned out fine. He ended up where he needed to be, but I guess my point is that the change in routine for him, it was a big deal. He was sort of wandering on the street, didn't necessarily want to move into the building. It was kind of still earlier in the year, so communication, I think, is really vital when there's a change in routine. And it seemed to me that the administration didn't necessarily understand or weren't proactive in realizing that just a half a block for someone like one of our children would make a big difference for them. So,
yeah, I think that's the hardest part. Is these seem like really minor things or changes, but for a person that's kind of has a very specific plan mapped out, that can be a big deal. And I mean, one of our concerns, we were talking about, well, do you send a 3-year-old on the bus to school or a 5-year-old? And it was like, well, my concern is, well, what happens if she gets to school and the person who's supposed to pick her up doesn't pick her up, and then it's like, how do you have all those contingency plans in place, and who's responsible for communicating all of that? So I think it's a complicated system, yeah. Which is I think it's a challenge for the school system and for the parents. So.
Yes, and in our case, we ended up having an arrival plan, a morning transportation arrival plan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much. That's really helpful. One of the other questions is, what is one thing you would like to share with other parents? Emily, was this something you wanted to speak to first?
Yes, I work with my parents for all my meals, and I helped delivering and pretends when life is going on. I work database is a QuickBooks. So, and that one is on my farms. I feed calves and cats too. Sometimes I'm up on the nipples. It's kind of hard.
And you were also talking a bit about chores you have to.
Yes, I have inside chores too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think part of, thank you for sharing all that again, and you were mentioning, I don't know how to do QuickBooks, Emily, so.
Well, QuickBooks, it's okay.
Maybe I can learn it at some point.
Okay.
So would others of you like to speak to that? Something you would like other parents to know?
I mean, I think that the biggest thing for us has just been that Alexa is part of our family. She's one of the kids. She's treated just like everybody else. And she has, she's a little bit behind in terms of what she might physically be able to do or understand, but she still, understands oh, you need to put that in the hamper and, helps bring stuff to the laundry room or whatever else she's excited about helping with. And so I think it's part of just having high expectations and encouraging your kids to do what they're able to do. And I think that's one of the best ways to try to help them be successful.
Well, in our house, we had a chore chart, and Isaac was definitely part of the chore chart. And so I think that establishing routines early on is critical, because when they get older, they might not want to be compliant. all of them, yes. All three of them. And I guess the other piece of advice I would have for parents in particular would be to, all of your family relies on you, that you really need to make time for yourself, whether that's walking or exercising or having a date night with your spouse. Whatever you enjoy, you need to replenish your energy. So that's really important.
I think Amy, were you wanting to speak to that as well? We kind of had a thought about what do you do for an outlet or to find support?
Yeah, since I stay home with my 3 kids, I do find it important to find time for myself outside of that. And I think going out with other parents, especially those who also have children with Down syndrome, has been very helpful for me to educate myself and to get ideas about how to deal with certain situations, or just be able to talk honestly about what life is like. So I know that for me that's important. I know that's not necessarily for everyone, but I do value that time. And we have our monthly mom's outings, and I try to really prioritize those. They're in my calendar. My husband knows that I really like to go to those. And I also do go out with other moms too, from my church and things like that. But I definitely try to carve out time for myself so that I can get away from it a little bit and have my own identity and really just try to learn, but also rejuvenate.
I think that's a great goal. I am not good at doing that. Having 2 2-year-olds, and that makes it somewhat challenging, but I'm getting better, slowly getting better at it.
Kimberly, would you like to talk a little bit about the inclusion efforts that have happened in your faith community, and perhaps that's a place where you rejuvenate, even though it's not a date night?
Yes. Well, we've been so fortunate that we've been so supported by our community and family. We attend a really great church, and once Alexa was born, they kind of saw the need for having a special needs ministry. So they have been really great and proactive about trying to identify people in the church that are willing to be helpers and kind of knowledgeable, having 2 people or 3 people that know that individual so they can help support them in whether it's the nursery or Sunday school, and that's actually drawn other families with special needs to our church. So we have a couple of families that have autistic children that are coming. And so that's just been really great, because I was nervous about leaving Alexa in the nursery, and I just, like, oh, she can't eat the same things that the kids are eating, and she's hypotonic, and if she's sick, she's even worse. And I didn't want them to feel uncomfortable about all of a sudden having this kiddo with extra needs dumped in their lap, and not feeling like they knew what to do. So that's been a really great thing that has been implemented in just a way to try to make sure that everybody can be included in different activities. And now we're working on who's going to help make that transition to Sunday school once they turn 3. But so we've had a really good experience with the inclusion, but we had good support. So
great, thank you. Mm-hmm. We'd like to see if there are other questions out in the audience for our panel of experts. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Recently, we have a 4-year-old in preschool, and just recently I noticed where he gets on the afternoon bus, and sometimes he doesn't want to, so he has to eat that lunch meal a little bit early, and he doesn't want to take the time to do that. But then when it's time to get ready for the bus, then he'll sign, okay, now I want to eat. So is that behavioral, or is that something? How should we address when we see that happen?
I'm not sure what the solution to that is, but I can relate to that. My daughter really enjoys being at school, so I think she starts acting out a little bit towards the end of the day because she sees that it's the end of the day. So I could see it potentially he's thinking, oh, I want to stay at school, maybe? Or at least that's how it is for our daughter, that she's thinking, I'm going to kind of drag my feet getting to the bus because maybe that'll prolong the time that I can be at school with my friends. And so I think they're trying to do a little bit more predictive things of looking ahead to anticipating that that's going to happen, but you'll get to come back tomorrow, or if visuals help.
I was going to say, sometimes visual schedules can be really helpful, of having kind of the daily schedule, kind of mapped out for the kiddos, so that they can actually take either the visual off when it's completed, or they can see what that next step is, and that there is a routine to the day, and hopefully having someone that can help kind of make that happen might be helpful. But yeah, there could be multiple motivating factors for that. But
well, and I know for many of our family members, transitions may be difficult, and so I would say working with your school staff or other experts to work on a visual calendar, step by step, or social stories, which lead them through in a story visual type pattern what's expected in a positive way. So, and you review that numerous times, as I understand. There are teachers who are experts, I'm sure, can explain that, but that would be a really good resource, I would say.
Those are great suggestions. Thanks. I think there was a question.
Yeah, I have a question for Teresa. So we're about to go into middle school. And so when Caitlin was younger, I think friendship was pretty easy with peers. So I'm just curious I know Isaac, he's awesome. So what has his experience been with peer friendships through middle school and high school? What does it look like?
Well, I would say in Isaac's experience, he has always been very welcomed, appreciated in the classroom by his peers, and he's a social young man, and so he really has many friendships. What we did through the years, we would always take the initiative to try and invite people into his life, in addition to the friendships that may happen naturally in the classroom. For example, when he would have a birthday, we would invite the entire class to come. And through the years, some of those friendships have remained, and some have changed, like they do for all of us. As he has aged into, say, middle school, we might arrange an outing at Plain, Wisconsin, a sporting trampoline place, for example, and invite a number of young people who we felt the relationship was very reciprocal. And we tried to be very proactive about being out in the community, attending sporting events. He's involved in clubs, and just depending on their interests. So I would say it's sort of like the Girl Scout phrase: you make new friends, but you keep the old. He has friends that have come in and out of his life. Some have been there for the duration of his years. And also, recently, we've reached out to other young people with disabilities, and not necessarily Down syndrome disabilities. It's sort of like that world has broadened for him as he's entered high school. Connecting with other families that we see a natural friendship, and trying to coach him also through the invitation process. So, is that helpful?
Those are great suggestions.
Emily, can I ask you how the teachers at Oregon School are helping you at Madison College and helped you with your applying for Project Surge and to Cutting Edge?
Okay, let's start with Madison College first. I'm taking classes there. It's similar to Catholic Shadow. but to take yoga, and we had classes, hour classes. Then Oregon, I had my experience in Oregon. I have swimming, community, and glad to eat. But teachers were helpful. We have a schedule for 4 things. For Edgewood, I interviewed that one. So it's very nice and asked me questions a lot. Some questions I know. So I asked questions to them. How the cafeteria is, what food is, everything. Went to a podcast church. Number 1, I took a tour. It was amazing. And number 2, it is skills assignment. Looks like interview. But each station has anything like March 15th in her bag, but it's not. You have to wait. It's going to apply. I don't know. If not, it's the first 2. I'm going to stay Mercer College friend.
Are you happy with the help you got from your high school teachers, or do you think you would like different? You wish it was different?
Sometimes I get help, sometimes I don't.
Okay, thanks. I'm a high school teacher, and I really like to get feedback about what helps and what doesn't help. So that's good.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. To the moms, how do you balance that fine line of your child with Down syndrome getting all the attention and your other children? So then how do you do that balance?
So balancing sibling needs, balancing needs.
It's a challenge. I mean, I think we've all talked about this. It is a challenge. It's and I have 2 girls that are the same age, and it's funny because Alexa's twin kind of understands that when Alexa needs something, like wants to be picked up, she has to hold my hand. She can't be picked up too. Or so in some ways the kids kind of figure that out, but it also makes you sad as a parent that you can't provide what they need also. So I don't know, it is a balancing act. We've been trying to be more consistent with saying, no, you need to walk, your sister is sick, she needs something. But Alexa's not always very excited about that. And we hear a lot of complaining about that and whining and things like that. So we're kind of taking the approach of trying to just, keep educating, keep, giving her the reasoning why as to, okay, your sister really needs help right now, you need to wait. But it is hard. But I mean, fortunately, her sisters have been very understanding about it. But I know they sometimes feel a little slighted because of that too. So.
I think balancing attention among siblings at all can even be hard because different stages of their life, they have different needs. But then you add the Down syndrome, and it does complicate things. Our daughter spent a lot of time in the hospital when she was younger, so we felt really guilty. My son was 3 at the time, and he needed a lot of attention, but he didn't get it. So one thing that was suggested to me was to add it was called special time, but he calls it specialty time. So we set aside 20 minutes every night, that almost every night, as long as timing works out, he gets to choose what he wants to do, whether it's just read a book or cuddle or eat dessert together or whatever. So we really carved that out for him. Being the oldest and having been through so much of what his sister struggled with and kind of lacking that attention, we've done that so that even if somehow throughout the day he got neglected, he gets that time and he looks forward to it. So that's one solution we've had for our
That's
family.
a great point, because we do something similar with Ellery where, like after her sisters go to bed or towards the end of the evening, like she wants to do little Legos, something her sisters can't do, and she and Daddy do little Legos. And now we've started rotating where, like I do bedtime with her one night, then Daddy does it the next night, so that, it seems more fair and they get some one-on-one time with each parent. But
And my sons are older, and Isaac certainly had many times in his life when he was in the hospital for extended periods of time. So we do as well try to work in those extra times one-on-one with our other children. And sometimes, you know, I can be exhausted and ready to go to bed, and my teenager comes to me like at the most inopportune time, having a question about something, my older one. But I think it's important to make time when they need you, all of your children, and also have what I would do once each summer, at the end of the summer, I would dedicate a day with one of my other two children, and we would take a day and go have an outing, and I just call it a day with Mom. And we'd go canoeing, or we would go do something they wanted to do. My other son was really into Thomas the Train for a while, and we went down to this great place near Argyle, I think it was. So we would dedicate a day so they would feel like that attention and appreciation. So that was a little more and above and beyond, and I'd have to make arrangements for my other children, but it was really important for us. So.
Any other questions? I'd like to give our panel of experts a round of applause. Thank you all for coming today to the Day with Experts, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
It's nice to meet you.